Hello everyone, welcome to Enigma Vault. I hope my voice and stories can be the bridge between your racing thoughts and peaceful sleep. If this journey can soothe you, please like and subscribe to my channel. You are safe here. Let the story begin. The wound on my right shoulder caused by the robotic arm was still bleeding, and blood mixed with sweat dripped onto the greasy cement floor. The sound of metal colliding hurt my eardrums. The combat robot closest to me raised its serrated blade. I barely rolled sideways, and my knees hit the protruding pipe heavily. My 50-year-old body is no longer what it used to be. Every movement seems to be struggling with rusty gears. Evan, left. Leah's voice rushed into my ears with the smell of gunpowder. I looked up, just in time to see another robot dangle from the vent, the red dot of its laser sight dancing on my chest. Instinct drove me to rush to the scrap metal pile next to me. Amidst the flying sparks, the laser burned a charred hole in the metal plate. The attack frequency of these iron lumps is too regular. Adrian covered the wound on his forehead and squatted down with his back against me. His white shirt, soaked with blood, stood like a faded cloud in the shadows. The young man who was supposed to inherit Victor's wealth didn't have fear in his eyes, but the sharp light of a hunter that I had seen countless times in the FBI. They pause for 0.3 seconds every time they turn, as if they were receiving instructions. I wiped the blood off my face and stared at the robot closest to me. A faint blue light flickered at its joints, which was the signal light for data transmission. My eyes swept across the curved screen of the giant metal object. Victor's smiling face was still playing, and the red dots of Grey Harbor Town were still spreading in the background. I suddenly remembered the circuit sketch in Margaret's diary, in which she circled the word central neural node in red pen. They have a command center. I tore off the corner of my clothes and wrapped it around the wound on my shoulder. Blood immediately soaked through the rough cloth. It may be behind the screen of that big guy. If we destroy it, all the robots will become scrap metal. Leia kicked the robot that was charging at her and hit the joint on its neck with her baton, sending out a string of sparks. How long will it take? 3 minutes. I pointed to the control console under the feet of the giant robot. Victor's family crest was engraved on the metal shell, exactly the same pattern as the light pink birthmark on the back of Leia's neck. Her pupils shrank, but she raised her chin again in an instant. I'll go. You two. One big and one small. Hold these iron coffins for me. Adrian suddenly laughed and put his bloody fingers on his lips. Madam Sheriff, the word old may need to be redefined. He picked up the wrench on the ground and rushed out, hitting the robot's joints with the wrench precisely, as if he had calculated the gap between each gear. I clenched the broken blade that I had ripped from the robot. The fatigue brought by aging is like a piece of lead pressing into my bones. But when my eyes swept over Leah's running back, a dusty memory suddenly came to my mind. When I was 5 years old, I curled up in the closet, and through the gap I saw a woman in police uniform standing between me and the man with a knife. Her back overlapped with the current Leah. Even the arc of her swinging ponytail was exactly the same. Evan, what are you daydreaming about? Adrian's roar brought me back to reality. The three robots approached in a triangle formation, their blades drawing arcs of death above their heads. I spun to avoid the attack from my left, and the broken blade pierced the visual sensor of the middle robot, splashing scalding oil in my face. The robot on the right grabbed my wrist, its metal clamps crackling my bones.
Hold on! Adrian's wrench hit the robot's elbow joint. Amid the crisp sound of cracking gears, I took the opportunity to pull back my hand and stab the broken blade into its power core.
The blast knocked us over, and I slammed into the concrete wall, with a fishy sweet taste in my throat. Probably a rib was broken. Out of the corner of my eye I saw Leah approaching the console. Her police boots stepped over the debris underground, and every step was like walking a tightrope. The giant robot's screen suddenly flickered, and Victor's smiling face twisted into that of a devil. Sheriff Crawford, do you really think you can escape the curse of your bloodline? Look at the mark on your neck. That's my family mark. Leah paused. I saw her hands on the back of her neck, her knuckles turning white. But the next second she shook her head and slammed the baton heavily on the protective cover of the console. Amid the harsh sound of metal deforming, Victor's projection suddenly rushed out of the screen. Not a holographic image, but a real person. He had walked around to the back of the control console at some point, wearing a well-tailored suit as if he was going to a charity dinner, holding a .45 caliber Colt pistol in his hand. Leah, Adrian and I shouted at the same time. Victor put the muzzle of his gun against her temple, his smile still so elegant, as if inviting a dance partner. My dear, your mother died in this way. She also thought she could resist fate. But what happened? He pulled the trigger with his thumb, and with a bang, but the bullet did not fire. Leah drove her knee hard into his lower abdomen, and when he bent over, she turned around and snatched the gun. The two wrestled in front of the console. Victor's gold-rimmed glasses fell to the ground, revealing the madness in his eyes. You are as stupid as your mother. Margaret's box can't save you. Grey Harbor Town should have been purified long ago. Fuck purification. Adrian hit Victor on the back of the neck with his wrench. The old man collapsed without even a grunt. Leah took the opportunity to pull out the main line on the console. The blue data stream moved like a living thing, and finally went out with a sizzle. All the robots beeped sharply at the same time. Their robotic arms fell to the ground, and their scanning lights dimmed one by one. The red dot on the Grey Haven skyline began to fade, like a spark blown away by the wind. I collapsed on the ground, watching Victor wake up from his coma. His eyes swept across the scrap metal on the ground, and he suddenly burst into laughter. You think you won? Look above your head. The fluorescent lights in the ceiling flickered violently, and the sirens tore through the air. The console's self-destruct countdown began ticking. Red numbers were reflected on everyone's face, and I smelled a burnt smell, the smell of an overloaded nuclear battery. It's too late to retreat. Leah's voice was soft, but I could hear the trembling in her voice. Adrian suddenly rushed to the console, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The blood on his forehead dripped onto the keys, like a red plum blossom in full bloom. I've seen my father's notes. The self-destruct program has a back door. He always said he wanted to leave himself a way out. The countdown jumps to 00. Adrian's fingers suddenly stopped, and then he pressed a key hard. The alarm stopped abruptly. The ceiling lights came back on, and only smoke was coming out of the console. Done. I stood up with the broken blade, and the wound on my left shoulder hurt so much that I gasped. Adrian nodded, but suddenly pointed to the corner. Father. Victor crawled towards the secret door at the base of the wall without knowing when. He turned around and smiled at us, and that smile overlapped with Margaret's on the screen. It turned out that the curve of Margaret's mouth was imitated by him. The game has just begun, Detective. His voice was mixed with the sound of the secret door opening. Next time we meet, I will let you watch Greyhaven rot with you before your own eyes. The secret door slammed shut, leaving only his suit buttons at the base of the wall, shining coldly under the light. Leah picked up the button and ran her fingertips over the family crest. Adrian squatted down and covered the back of my hand with his bloody hand. His body temperature, transmitted through his skin, reminded me of the words on the last page of Margaret's diary. Love is more powerful than hatred. But at this moment, my throat felt like it was clogged with a lump of red-hot charcoal. Victor's laughter was still ringing in my ears. In the passage behind the secret door, I could faintly hear the humming sound of a robot restarting. We won this round, but the paranoid who used evil to continue the memory of his deceased wife is disappearing into the shadows of Grey Harbor Town with an even darker secret. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a gust of wind blew from somewhere, carrying Victor's suit buttons to the corner of the wall. I stared at the button and suddenly remembered the last words I heard when I was hiding in the closet at the age of 5. Mommy will protect you, little Evan. And now, it may be the entire Grey Harbor town that needs to be protected. I stared at the suit button that rolled away in the corner, and my Adam's apple moved. The dull pain brought by aging is seeping out from the bone marrow. The 50-year-old body is like a broken truck that has been in disrepair for a long time. And every time the joints move, there is a tiny creaking sound. Leah squatted down, the metal police badge flashing a cold light on her chest, and her fingertips were trembling as she put the button into the evidence bag. I knew it was not fear, but suppressed anger. He ran to the underground passage. Adrian pulled off his blood-stained cufflinks, revealing a family tattoo on his wrist that was identical to Victor's. But Dad won't run far. His voice was hoarse, as if it had been rubbed by sandpaper. His souvenirs are all in the Rose Manor nursing home. I raised my eyes. Rose Manor, this name always carries a taboo in the mouths of the elderly in Huigang Town. 20 years ago, the night my mother had the accident, I curled up in the closet and heard her shouting on the phone, "Please don't go to Rose Manor." Later, when the sirens tore through the night, her hand was still holding the microphone. That place was closed 3 years ago. Leah took out a tactical flashlight and swept the beam across the gears on the edge of the secret door. But last month, the City Hall received a repair application. The applicant was the Marlowe Charitable Foundation. She looked up at me, the brim of her police hat pulled down low, hiding the dark tide in her eyes. "Victor is rebuilding it." Adrian suddenly laughed, and that laugh was uglier than crying. "He wants to put the memory of his deceased wife in a glass jar and keep it like a butterfly specimen. There is a laboratory in the basement of the sanatorium. And inside," his throat rolled, "there are 12 frozen bodies." My temples were throbbing. The ability to whisper the dead burned at my fingertips, like a silver spoon roasted by fire. But I didn't rush to use it. It wasn't the right time yet. "Directions," I interrupted. "The shortest way from here to Rose Manor." Leah took out her cell phone. The blue light from the screen made her face turn blue. "Take the old canal branch line and pass through the abandoned steel mill. Last month, a homeless person saw a mechanical dog patrolling there." She shook the surveillance screenshot on her phone. The red eyes of the metal hound glowed fiercely in the photo. "Victor's private army. I'll lead the way." Adrian pulled off his coat and tied it around his waist, revealing the Glock hidden in his vest. Dad likes to hide new locks in old things. I know his habit. When we set out, the night in Grey Harbor Town was sinking into the thickest ink. The iron frames of the abandoned steel plant loomed overhead, and the rusted steel plates made a hollow sound when stepped on. Leah walked in the front, with rusty dust floating in the cone of light from her tactical flashlight. Adrian was the last, touching every pillar he passed as if he was confirming something. I was in the middle, my right hand always on the pistol at my waist. It was the Colt Python I smuggled with me when I left the FBI, and the barrel still smelled of gunpowder from when I killed the serial killer 3 years ago. "Stop." Adrian suddenly raised his hand. His voice was like broken ice colliding. There was a sound of metal rubbing from the scrap pile on the left. I took out a pen-shaped flashlight and shone it over there. 2 red lights came out from the gaps in the scraps. It was a mechanical hound, much larger than the one in the surveillance video, with the Marlowe family crest engraved on its neck. 2 at 3 o'clock. Leah was already half crouching with her gun raised. "Evan, there's a weld mark on the left joint. Hit the knee." I didn't answer. Aging has made my vision a little blurry, but the moment the gunshot rang out, time suddenly slowed down. This is a side effect of Whisper of the Dead. Every time before using this ability, my senses will be abnormally sharp. There was indeed fresh solder on the knee of the left mechanical dog. I pulled the trigger, and the bullet rubbed against its heat dissipation port and penetrated into the joint. The crisp sound of cracking gears mixed with Leah's gunshot, and half of the head of the one on the right was blown off. "Well done." Adrian kicked the mechanical wreckage on the ground. A piece of blood-stained cloth was revealed in the crack of the metal shell. It was a broken human finger, and the nail was still painted with pink nail polish. My stomach was filled with sourness. That's the convenience store clerk who disappeared last week and whose picture Leah just showed me this morning. He's experimenting on living people. Leah's voice was as cold as an icicle, connecting human nerves to machines. Let's keep going. Electric sounds began to be heard in the ventilation ducts of the abandoned steel plant, like countless bees flapping their wings. Adrian suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. Look, the sign of the Rose Manor Sanatorium was hung on the wall 20 meters away. The red paint had faded to dark brown, and half of the word manor had fallen off, like a grinning mouth. The top of the wall was wrapped with barbed wire, and there was a camera every 5 meters, the lens slowly turning towards us. The camera is heat sensitive. Adrian took out his tactical knife and cut the wire, but Dad likes to plant hidden stakes under the open sentry. He squatted down and picked up a piece of copper wire as thin as a hair with the tip of the knife. A tripwire, connected to a grenade. Leah took out the bomb disposal pliers, and her movements were gentler than a surgeon stitching a wound. I dismantled this kind of thing in Afghanistan 3 years ago. The fuse is nylon, and you have to cut the blue thread first. I stood by and stared at the scene inside the wall. The windows of the main building of the sanatorium were all boarded up. There was a window on the second floor that was not sealed tightly, and the moonlight leaked in, illuminating a row of glass jars inside. There were organs floating in each jar. The heart was still slowly contracting, and the blood vessels were like red vines climbing all over the glass, with whisper of the dead. Leah said suddenly, after she untied the last wire. She looked up at me and said, "The operator of the mechanical dog should be nearby." I knew what she meant. Although the memories of the mechanical guards are not human, there will be operation records in the core chip. I squatted down and picked up the broken head of the mechanical dog. The metal shell cut my palm so hard that it hurt. When the ability was activated, the skin on the back of the neck felt like it was on fire, and a blinding white light flashed before my eyes. 30 seconds of memories came flooding in. On a rainy night, Victor stood in the laboratory. His white hair was blown up by the wind from the ventilation duct, and he held a syringe in his hand, injecting light green liquid into the core module of the mechanical dog. "Be more sharp," he said to his assistant. "Next time I catch Evan Hastings, I will make him watch every brick in Grey Harbor burn with his own eyes." The picture suddenly distorted, and the mechanical dog's perspective turned to the gap in the wall, where there was a red button hidden behind the ivy. I suddenly let go, and the mechanical head fell to the ground with a clang. The price of aging comes quickly and severely. In the mirror-like wall of memory, I see more wrinkles appearing on my face in an instant, and the white hair at my temples falling down in wisps. Leah held my arm, the warmth of her palm seeping through my shirt. "Are you okay? The emergency exit is behind the ivy in the gap in the fence." I gasped and pointed in that direction. Press the red button. Adrian had walked over and parted the ivy to reveal a button hidden in the wall. He looked back at us, the moonlight shining on his face, splitting his expression into light and dark. Dad always said that the most dangerous safe house should have an entrance that looks like the safest toy. He pressed the button. The sirens tore through the night. All the lights in the sanatorium suddenly came on. Under the harsh white light, the wooden boards of the main building crackled and rows of mechanical guards emerged from windows, ventilation ducts, and even underground drains. Their metal joints dragged sparks on the ground, in the light net formed by red eyes. I heard Victor's laughter coming from the loudspeaker, mixed with the crackling sound of electricity. "Welcome to my playground, detective." Leah had already drawn her baton, barbs popping out of the metal. Adrian had swapped out his Glock for a shotgun, the butt resting against his shoulder. I reached for my Colt Python, the sound of the bullet being loaded drowning out the alarm. The nearest mechanical guard was only 5 meters away from us, and the sound of its metal claws scraping the ground was like nails scratching a blackboard. I stared at the Marlowe coat of arms on its neck, and suddenly remembered the blue butterfly brooch my mother pinned on my collar when she stuffed me into the closet when I was 5 years old. Like this coat of arms, it was made of the most exquisite shell, wrapped in the most rotten core. "Hold on," I yelled to the two men, my finger on the trigger. "Someone has to clean up this mess today." Amid the roar of the mechanical guard, Leia had already swung her baton. Amid the whistling sound of metal claws scraping across the ground, my Colt Python fired the third bullet. The armor-piercing bullet tore open the neck joint of the nearest mechanical guard. Its red eyes suddenly dimmed for a moment, but it suddenly raised its forelimbs. "The power system of this damn thing is more durable than I thought." Evan left. Leah's baton made a whirring sound, and the barb pierced into another guard's optical sensor. Sparks flew from the metal shell. She used the force to spin around and kick the gear set on the thing's knee with her boots. These pieces of junk are reducing our range of movement towards the core area. I shook off the smoke from the barrel of my gun, and saw from the corner of my eye that Adrian's shotgun had blasted a cloud of metal fragments at the end of the corridor. As he bent over and rolled, his tactical vest scraped against the wall, revealing the modified Glock on his back. Victor's son obviously did not inherit his father's obsession with elegance. Their attack rhythm is too synchronized. I wiped the sweat from my face, my back teeth aching from biting them. The dull pain brought by aging spread up from the spine. The 50-year-old body was like an old truck with a leak in the intense exercise. It changed its attack mode every 7 seconds, as if it was controlled by something. Adrian kicked the mechanical arm that was blocking his way, the barrel of the gun still smoking. My father's underground laboratory is right below the sanatorium. The control center should be there. He pulled off the silver cross on his collar. The chain was stained with oil. But from here we have to pass through the third security area. "I'll cover you." Leah pulled out a second tactical stick and put it on her belt with her backhand. "These iron lumps are chasing you. If I can lead them away for 5 minutes." The alarm suddenly raised its pitch. I looked up and the emergency light on the ceiling began to flash, and the red light cut Leah's face into pieces. The moment she nodded at me, I smelled the smell of rust mixed with the smell of gunpowder. It was the blood on the barbs of her baton. I don't know if it was machine oil. "Go." Adrian grabbed my arm. As we rushed into the security passage, we heard the crisp sound of Leah's baton smashing glass behind us, mixed with the metal friction sound of the mechanical guards turning collectively. Half of the sensor lights in the stairwell were broken. Adrian took out a tactical flashlight and swept the light across the wires and the cracks in the wall. The black rubber was peeled off halfway, revealing the optical fiber wrapped with red ribbons. When my father renovated the nursing home 3 years ago, he said he wanted to install an intelligent nursing system. He lowered his voice. "Now it seems that these killing machines are being cared for." When we got down to the 3rd floor below ground, the air suddenly became cooler. A musty smell seeped out from the cracks in the wall, mixed with some sweet smell of chemicals. Adrian's flashlight shone a shadow at the corner, and I took the initiative to press him against the wall. It was not a mechanical guard, but a woman in a hospital gown. Her hair was long and reached down to her waist, with dark brown stains on the ends. I recognized it as Margaret White, the experimental subject at Victor's private nursing home. The last time I saw her in the morgue, she was huddled in the corner counting the gaps between the floor tiles, but now she raised her head, with an unnatural bluish-gray color in the whites of her eyes. "Evan Hastings." Her voice was like 2 stones rubbing against each other. "Your mother's last words were 'Don't be afraid, little butterfly,' wasn't it?" My temple throbbed. Memories of when I was 5 years old came flooding back. The musty smell in the closet, my mother's shaking fingers as she pinned the blue butterfly brooch, her voice coming through the wooden door, mixed with the gunshots outside. Margaret's pupils began to dilate. and I saw my reflection distorted into pieces in her eyes. It was memory manipulation. Don't look her in the eyes. Adrian raised his gun, but was knocked away by an invisible force field. I felt a chill on the back of my neck, and Margaret's voice entered my mind. Don't you want to know why Leah always flips through that book on the history of forensic medicine in the middle of the night? When she turns to page 73, her finger pauses for 3 seconds. I bit the tip of my tongue, and the smell of blood dispelled the hallucination. The ability of Whisper of the Dead felt hot beneath my skin. This was the second time I had actively triggered it to resist a mental attack. The moment his fingertips touched Margaret's wrist, her memories came flooding back. As the lab coats held her limbs and the needle pierced her temple, Victor stroked her face with white gloves. Remember, Margaret, you are the perfect memory container. Flashback. She huddled in the basement and heard Victor say to his assistant, "The Hastings kid has the ability to read memories. Just in time. Let Margaret give him a little surprise." I pulled my hand back suddenly, my palms covered in cold sweat. Margaret's ability requires the establishment of memory resonance, and her weakness. I stared at the light blue blood vessels behind her ears. Those were the marks left by long-term injections of nerve drugs.
Adrian, I yelled. Shoot the fire hydrant at her feet with the shotgun.
The moment the water splashed, Margaret's pupils contracted. The electrified water splashed on her, and the nerve agent evaporated when it came into contact with water. She staggered and held onto the wall, whimpering like a cub. I seized the opportunity to rush over and hit the nerve node on the back of her neck with the butt of the gun. I learned this trick from Leah, who always said, when dealing with people with superpowers, physical attacks are the most effective. Adrian had already pried open the security door when Margaret collapsed to the ground. Behind the door was a metal cabin with a control panel engraved with the Marlowe family crest embedded in the wall. Countless wires penetrated the wall like blood vessels. This is the main control center. Adrian's fingers flew across the panel. My father's password is my mother's death anniversary. But, wait. There's a self-destruct program here. Cut off the signal from the mechanical guard first. I tore open my collar, and the palpitations brought by aging made me almost unable to stand. My 50-year-old heart was beating wildly in my chest, and I could hear the murmur in my blood vessels. The moment Adrian pressed the confirmation button, the alarms in the entire nursing home suddenly disappeared. The surveillance cameras on the ceiling went off one by one. There was a dull thud of a heavy metal object falling in the distance. The mechanical guard on Leah's side had stopped. Successful. Adrian wiped his sweat, and the blue light from the panel made his face turn blue. I stared at the red numbers jumping in the corner of the panel. No, it's the beginning of something worse. The countdown started jumping from 60, and each beat was like a hammer hitting my nerves. Victor had expected us to find this place. This is a trap. The ground suddenly shook violently. The lights on the ceiling exploded one after another, and metal fragments fell on my head. Adrian dragged me towards the security door, but found that it was locked. A burning smell oozed from the cracks in the wall, and I heard Leah's screams in the distance, mixed with the sound of explosions getting closer and closer. This way. Adrian kicked open the ventilation duct in the corner of the wall, and the rusty iron net fell down, revealing the dark passage underneath. He climbed in first, turned around and reached out to pull me. This was the backup escape route when the sanatorium was built. I secretly changed the route when I was a child. The explosions were getting closer. I grabbed his hand, and the old joints made a clicking sound. The smell of damp earth wafted from the ventilation duct, and I didn't know where it led to. I heard the final roar of the control center behind me, and the heat wave and metal fragments rushed towards me. I suddenly hunched my shoulders and followed Adrian into the darkness. In the darkness, I felt for the blue butterfly brooch in my pocket. Mother's warmth is long gone, leaving only the coldness of metal. But I heard it, very softly, as if it came from the deepest part of my memory. "Don't be afraid, little butterfly." There was a light at the end of the ventilator, very small and dim, like a dying star. The iron sheet of the ventilation duct vibrated in the aftermath of the explosion, like a muffled drum beating on bones. I followed Adrian and crawled forward, gasping in pain, as my old knees scraped against the rusted pipe wall. The damp, moldy smell mixed with the burnt smell drilled into my nose, and the back of my neck was still covered with blood from the metal fragments that had just been cut, and it felt cold. "Turn right ahead," Adrian's voice echoed. Back then, I secretly connected the pipes to the underground wine cellar. His voice suddenly got stuck, and his feet stopped above my head. I looked up and saw his shadow frozen into a silhouette, and the light from the vent was suddenly blocked by something. "Dead." Adrian's voice trembled. I followed his gaze. There was a man standing at the ventilation duct, with his back to the dim light, wearing a suit as straight as if he was attending a charity dinner. But those hands, the right hand holding a silver pistol, the left wrist wrapped with a faded lace handkerchief, were the ones I had seen in the photos of the murder scene 20 years ago. They were the relics of Victor's deceased wife. "My dear son," Victor's voice was like a knife dipped in honey. "You always say that I should let go of the past. But you see," he raised his left hand. The corner of the handkerchief was stained with dark red. "Her blood is still flowing in my veins." He turned to me. His eyes behind the gold-rimmed glasses were terrifyingly bright. "Evan Hastings, do you think you can expose me with the memories of those dead people? The last thing your mother looked at before she died was you, right?" I clutched the blue butterfly brooch in my pocket. 30 seconds of memory flooded my temples. My mother pinned to the kitchen floor, blood oozing from the back of her head, her hand desperately reaching for the crib, and me hiding under the bed, clutching the brooch she had pinned to my swaddling clothes. "You don't understand at all," Adrian suddenly yelled. "Your so-called continued memory is an experiment using 37 lives. The girl you pushed into the incinerator last week was only 17 years old." "Shut up." Victor pointed his gun at Adrian. "You'll never understand. When you watch the memory of your lover peel off piece by piece in your brain, you would be willing to give the whole world in exchange for her to see you for the last time." The moment he pulled the trigger, I rushed over and pushed Adrian away. The bullet grazed the tip of my ear and hit the wall of the pipe. Sparks splashed on the back of my hand, and the pain made me gasp. There were hurried footsteps outside the ventilation duct. Leah rushed in holding a tactical flashlight, with the police badge on her chest shining coldly. "Evan, there's a gap on the left." She stopped talking abruptly and glanced at Victor. "Mr. Marlowe, aren't you giving a speech at the charity gala?" "Miss Sheriff," Victor actually smiled, "you should check the fire alarm records at the town hall. 20 years ago today, the gas tank at the Grey Harbor steel plant exploded." He tilted his head. "And the time of my wife's death was exactly the same." Leah's pupils suddenly contracted. I've seen how calm she was when she was dissecting corpses, but at this moment, she looked as if someone had poured ice water over her head. There was a light brown birthmark on the back of her neck, and its shape was exactly the same as the memory extractor family mark I saw in the experimental subjects file. "So you knew it a long time ago." Leah's voice was hoarse. "Of course," Victor pointed his gun at her. "Why do you think I recommended you to be the sheriff? You have the purest memory carrier blood flowing in your body. Once I extract all the fragments from your brain..." "Fuck you." I picked up a piece of rusty iron from the ventilation duct and threw it at him. Victor dodged to the side, and as the gun went off, Leah rushed over and pulled me into the gap in the pipe. Metal fragments crashed down where we were just now. Adrian rushed over from the other side, grabbed Leah's belt and dragged us into the underground wine cellar. The wine cellar was more spacious than I had imagined. The walls were lined with several rows of dusty wine racks. In the middle stood a silver instrument half a person's height, with wires crawling toward the ceiling like a group of snakes.
Victor's experimental subjects. Those modified humans who were injected with memory extractors by him are slowly walking out of the shadows.
Their eyes were cloudy gray, and there were silver tubes inserted into their necks. I recognized one of them. He was the gas station worker who went missing last week. There was a piece missing from his right ear, and the wound was exactly the same as the one in the photo of the corpse. Their pain nerves had been cut off. Leah took out the scalpel she carried with her, but the spine is the weak point. I've seen similar incisions in the morgue. There are still 30 seconds of memory. Adrian pulled open the collar of the experimental subject, revealing the metal chip on the collarbone. My father installed a memory storage device in their brains, which will generate electromagnetic pulses when reading. The nearest experimental subject has pounced over. I gritted my teeth and walked over to grab his wrist. His skin was as cold as ice, but the moment I touched him, Whisper of the Dead started. 30 seconds of memories came flooding back. Under the fluorescent lights of the gas station, Victor held up the needle and smiled. Don't be afraid. This is a gift for you to remember your wife forever. Then the needle pierced the back of his neck, causing severe pain and blurred vision. The last thing he saw was his wife's wedding photo torn into pieces. He's afraid of electromagnetic pulses, I yelled. The chip is 3 fingers below the collarbone. Leah's scalpel pierced the subject's collarbone accurately, and the sound of metal friction was harsh. The thing screamed like a mechanical failure, and fell to the ground with its hands covering its neck. Adrian picked up the red wine bottle from the wine rack and smashed it at the chip position of the second experimental subject. Glass fragments mixed with dark red liquid splashed, and the thing twitched twice and stopped moving. Victor's gun went off. I felt heat on my left shoulder, and blood immediately soaked through my shirt. Leah swung the scalpel with her backhand and nailed it into the wall, brushing past Victor's ear. He stepped back to the silver instrument and pressed his finger on the console. You think you won? Look at what this is. The instrument screen lit up, showing surveillance footage from 20 years ago. I was in the crib clutching a blue butterfly brooch. My mother was lying in a pool of blood, and standing behind her was a man in a police uniform. My adoptive father, old Sheriff Hastings. Surprised. Victor's voice was like a venomous snake spitting out its tongue. Do you think the one who saved you back then was a hero? He was my earliest experimental subject. He pressed the last button, and the instrument beeped. Now all the memories I extracted will be integrated into a perfect soul. My wife's, your mother's, and your adoptive father's, and you, he opened his arms, will become the sacrifice of this perfect memory. The ground suddenly cracked into spiderweb-like cracks. I heard the groaning of twisted steel bars and the collapse of the oak beams in the wine cellar. Leah dragged me toward the door, and Adrian rushed to the console to try to cut off the power. Victor smiled and raised his gun, but at the moment he pulled the trigger, he was hit on the shoulder by a falling oak beam. His gun flew out and rolled to my feet. I picked up the gun and pointed it at his heart, but he was still laughing until tears came out. It's too late, Evan. Look at your hands. I lowered my head. The skin on the back of my hand was wrinkling at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if all the moisture had been drained out. This is the price of overusing Whispers of the Dead. But what is even more terrifying is that the memory images on the instrument screen began to overlap. My mother's voice, my adoptive father's sighs, and Victor's deceased wife's cries all exploded in my mind. This is the energy fluctuation of memory fusion. Leah's voice trembled. The foundation of the entire sanatorium is about to collapse. Adrian suddenly shouted, "The exit is blocked." He pointed at the door of the wine cellar. The red bricks on the entire wall were falling down, and dust was coming in like yellow mist. Victor slumped beside the instrument, blood oozing from his crushed shoulder, but he was still smiling. How romantic it is to die together, Mr. Hastings. Your mother's last memory will accompany you to hell. I gripped the gun tightly, but my fingers were shaking. It's not because of fear. but because the aging joints are protesting. There was a more violent explosion outside the ventilation duct, and the chandelier on the ceiling fell down and shattered into pieces 10 centimeters away from my feet. Leah suddenly grabbed my wrist and thrust the scalpel into my hand. Use this to pierce the core of the instrument. I've seen the design. The energy box is in. A muffled sound interrupted her words. Adrian rushed over with a sharp piece of steel bar stuck in his back. His blood splattered on my face, warm, like the body temperature of my mother when she held me.
Daddy, please.
His voice was so light it sounded like a sigh. Let her rest in peace. Victor's smile froze. He crawled over and hugged Adrian, tears dripping on his son's pale face. Adrian, you never called me Dad. The instrument's beeping suddenly changed pitch. I saw energy fluctuations condense into blue light bands in the air, like snakes coming to life. Leah dragged me towards the instrument, the scalpel flashing with a cold light. The moment the tip of the knife pierced the energy box, the entire sanatorium let out a dying groan. "Run!" Leah yelled. We stumbled toward the back door of the wine cellar. Victor's scream was heard from behind, mixed with the roar of exploding instruments. I looked back for the last time. Victor was holding Adrian, gradually blurring in the blue light, like an old photo wet by rain. As soon as the door was knocked open, the ground cracked. Leah and I fell into a rubble pile, with rubble raining down on us. I held her tightly, and could hear my own rapid heartbeat, and the roar that was getting closer and closer, like an earthquake. That's not an explosion. That's a wave of energy spreading. I looked up. The sky was dyed an eerie purple blue, just like the color outside the window on that rainy night, 20 years ago when my mother held me and hid under the bed. Leah grabbed my hand. Her palms were covered in blood, and I couldn't tell if it was mine or hers. We stared at each other, and heard the shrieking sound of twisted metal behind us. The remains of the instrument were releasing something more terrifying than an explosion. "Evan?" Leah's voice trembled. "What is that?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out, because I saw shadows moving in the purple-blue light. It's not a person. It's not an experimental subject. It's a memory. It is the shadow of the mother, the shadow of the adoptive father, and the shadow of Victor's deceased wife. Their outlines became clearer and clearer, and their eyes were filled with the same gray as the experimental subjects. And in the center of these shadows, there were a pair of eyes staring at me. They were the eyes of little Evan, who hid under the bed 20 years ago. The ground shook violently again. Leah and I were thrown to the ground. I felt for the blue butterfly brooch in my pocket. This time my mother's voice was clear, as if she was standing next to me. "Little butterfly, fly." But I can't fly, because I heard a clearer roar coming from underground. That was the sound of the memory fusion being completed. The entire sanatorium began to tilt. Leah pulled me towards the open space, but the shadow behind me was getting closer and closer. I looked back and saw Victor standing in the ruins. Adrian in his arms was no longer breathing, and the madness on his face turned into a smile of relief. "She's back," he said. Then, purple-blue light engulfed everything. My temple was throbbing so hard that my retina was covered with purple-blue spots. Leah's hands were pinching my arms, her nails almost digging into the flesh. The vibration just now had thrown us against the wall, and she was pressing her whole body on me, with a protruding steel bar on her back. I heard heavy breathing coming from my throat like an old bellows that had fallen into disrepair. "Evan, Evan," Leah called me, her voice torn to pieces by the rumbling of the ground. I looked up and saw that the chandelier on the ceiling was shaking, and glass shards were falling down, shattering into stars in the purple-blue light. At that moment I saw clearly. It was not light, but some kind of energy flow, like liquid lightning, crawling through the cracks in the walls and pipes all over the building. The fire extinguisher in the corner suddenly exploded, and white powder spread into the light stream, turning it into a strange gray-purple color. Adrian. Leah suddenly let go of me. I followed her gaze and looked over. The boy that Victor had just held in his arms was curled up in the rubble 10 meters away, his chest still heaving. There was a hole on his forehead, and blood dripped down his chin onto his medical gown like a blooming red rose. I propped myself up and felt a piercing pain in my knees. My old bones made a crisp sound as they vibrated. This 50-year-old body was more fragile than I had imagined. "Come here," I shouted to Adrian. He heard the sound and moved towards us, picking at the gravel with his fingers. At this time, I smelled a burning smell, the smell of a short circuit in the wires. Following the smell, we saw black smoke coming out of the crack in the door of the switch room at the end of the corridor, and the purple-blue light streams gathered there to form a more intense vortex.
That's the energy supply. I suddenly remembered the circuit diagram I saw in the monitoring room 3 days ago. There are 3 independent energy supply systems buried under Victor's laboratory, and the most hidden one is marked memory resonance.
At the time, I thought it was a gimmick of a medical device, but now it seems that those shadows floating in the light are not memories at all, but spirits forcibly pulled out by this thing. Leah had dragged Adrian over to us. The boy's eyelashes were trembling and his pupils were dilated, but he was still able to speak. "My dad." He changed the self-destruct sequence. The original bomb was replaced with a memory fusion device, which requires continuous power supply for 30 minutes to complete. He coughed, and blood foam splashed on the back of my hand. There are still 17 minutes left. 17 minutes. Enough to shatter the entire sanatorium. Enough to completely materialize the shadows with gray eyes. Enough to tear the fault zone under the town of Gray Harbor apart with energy. I remembered the report from the Geological Bureau last month, that the strata here are as brittle as an old biscuit. "Shut off the power." Leah's voice was like a knife. "You have the schematic in your head." I nodded. My throat suddenly tightened. The little Evan who hid under the bed 20 years ago was now standing in the light stream staring at me. His eyes were exactly the same as mine now, with a teardrop mole at the left corner of his eye and a fingernail scratch behind his right ear. That was when my mother was scratched by the door frame when she held me for the last time. "Go." Leah picked up the fire extinguisher from the corner and threw it at the nearest mechanical guard. The thing had been huddled against the wall, its metal shell glowing coldly. After being hit, 6 mechanical arms suddenly popped out, and its serrated blades brushed against the ends of Leah's hair. I rushed over and pushed her away, and was hit hard on the back, which was burning with pain. Adrian pulled out a wrench from somewhere, and smashed it on the sensor of the mechanical guard. Blue sparks flew, and the thing fell to the ground crookedly, its mechanical arms still twitching. We crouched down and ran to the distribution room. Blocks of cement began to fall from the ventilation duct above my head. I heard the crisp sound of glass breaking behind me, and looked back. Those shadows of memories were approaching. My mother's shadow reached out to touch me, but her fingertips went through my arm, giving me goosebumps. The door of the distribution room was locked. Leah hit the door 3 times with the butt of her gun, and the metal door groaned under the strain. I felt the wire in the crack of the door, bit open the insulation with my teeth, and twisted the 2 copper wires together. The current ran through the tip of my tongue. My eyes went black, but I heard the door lock click. "Go in." I pushed Adrian in first. The distribution room was smaller than I had imagined. 3 walls were covered with densely packed circuit boards, and purple-blue light streams were moving between the boards like snakes. The central console was flashing red, and the countdown showed the main energy source is at the 2nd port in the 3rd row. Adrian's voice trembled as he pointed to the wall on the right. "My dad asked me to debug it last week. The red cable is the main energy supply line." I looked in the direction of his finger. The red cable was as thick as my wrist, covered with insulating rubber, and printed with the words "Memory Resonance Core." Leah had already pulled out her tactical knife, the tip of the knife against the cable. "Do you need to cut it completely?" No. I held her hand. This thing is powered by antimatter. If you cut it off directly, it will explode. We need to turn off the overload protection first. I bent over and pulled open the panel of the console. The wiring inside was like a tangled mess. All the circuit knowledge I learned when I was in the FBI 20 years ago suddenly came flooding back to me. I found the relay marked OP27 and used the back of a knife to loosen the screw. Now disconnect it. When Leah's knife went down, I heard a sound like a balloon deflating. The purple-blue light stream suddenly shrank, as if being pulled back by something. The red light on the console began to flash, and the countdown stopped at 12. Adrian slumped to the ground and wiped the blood off his face with his sleeve. Success. For now, I stared at the fading light. But Victor must have a backup plan. As soon as he finished speaking, the whole building suddenly let out a dying groan. Large chunks of cement from the ceiling fell down, and the circuit board closest to us exploded with a bang, and the heat wave made me stagger. Leah rushed over and pushed me to the ground. The broken glass scraped against the back of her neck, and blood oozed out. Look, Adrian pointed at the console. The countdown that had stopped started again, this time showing 0359, and the red numbers were more dazzling than before. The door of the distribution room was covered with a layer of lavender film at some point. I reached out and touched it, and it felt like touching the water, with a burning pain in my fingertips. It's an energy barrier. Leah's voice dropped. Victor sealed all the exits. I looked up at the ventilation duct. It was less than 30 centimeters in diameter, and an adult could not get out at all. The emergency exit indicator light in the corner flashed a dim green light, but when I rushed over, the door was also blocked by the light film. Victor's face appeared in the light film, with a smile on his lips, overlapping with the man who shot in my living room 20 years ago. Welcome to the last party, Evan. His voice came from all directions. You think you can stop her by cutting off the power? No, she had already merged enough memories. When the sanatorium collapses, this energy will flow through the underground water system throughout Grey Harbor Town. Everyone who dies here will come back. The countdown jumped to the purple-blue light stream became active again, and the shadows of memories approached again. This time their outlines were clearer, and I could even see the blue butterfly hairpin in my mother's hair, exactly the same as the brooch in my pocket. Leah clenched the gun tightly, and the sound of the bullet being loaded was particularly loud in the enclosed space. Adrian tore off his shirt and pressed hard on the wound on his forehead. Blood still seeped through the fabric and dripped onto the ground in a red line. I took out the blue butterfly brooch, and my mother's voice rang in my ears again, this time clearer than ever. Little butterfly, but I can't fly, because I heard a clearer roar coming from underground. It was the sound of the earth breaking. The corridor outside the light film began to collapse, and rubble hit the barrier like rain, causing ripples. The countdown jumped to 0159, and the console suddenly emitted a sharp beep. A stream of purple-blue light gathered into a vortex above our heads. A woman's face could be vaguely seen in it, exactly the same as the photo of Victor's deceased wife.
She's back! Victor's laughter was mixed in with the rumbling of the ground. And you with her will stay in Greyhaven Town forever.
Leah's hand grabbed my wrist. It was hot, with the temperature of blood. Adrian's breath hit the back of my neck, as rapid as a drum. I stared at the countdown on the console that jumped to 0059, and suddenly remembered that rainy night 20 years ago. I was hiding under the bed, listening to the gunshots in the living room, and my mother's blue butterfly hairpin fell beside me. At that time, I thought I was going to die, but in the end, my adoptive father broke open the window and carried me out. Now, who will come and break down this door? The purple-blue light began to devour everything outside the barrier. Even the air was distorted. The moment the countdown jumped to 0000, the entire nursing home emitted a roar louder than any thunder. I heard Leah yell something. Adrian grabbed my other hand, and my mother's shadow finally touched my face, cold as ice. Then, darkness came. I was woken up by the dust that choked my nose. My throat felt like it was clogged with a ball of burnt cotton, and when I opened my eyes, all I could see were floating dust particles, as if someone had sprinkled a whole bag of flour into the air. Leah's hand was still gripping my wrist, her nails almost digging into the flesh. She was lying on her side next to me, with a bloody cut on her forehead, and blood was dripping down her temples onto the concrete floor, staining the dust into dark red stars. Adrian was lying on my legs, his young back rising and falling with his rapid breathing, and there was a piece of peeling war paint on the back of his neck, which made him look like a crooked white rose. "Evan?" Leah's voice was hoarse, and her fingers moved gently on my wrist. "Are you still alive?" I tried to stand up and my spine made a crackling sound. My 50-year-old body is not as good as it used to be. The ceiling above his head cracked into spiderweb-like patterns, and several pieces of twisted steel bars hung down, casting hideous shadows on the ground. After the loud roar just now, the entire sanatorium seemed to have its backbone pulled out from the middle. The windows at the end of the corridor cracked into radial shapes, and you could see broken bricks falling from the sky outside, as if God was throwing stones. Countdown. I touched the electronic watch in my pocket that I had removed from the console. The glass was broken, and the pointer stopped at 0, but the helm of the purple-blue light stream still lingered in the air, like some high-frequency beeping sound, which made the back of the teeth ache. Adrian suddenly turned over and sat up, with broken plaster on his blonde hair. The self-destruct sequence my father activated was not just to blow up the building. His Adam's apple rolled. That light stream. He used the energy core made by my mother. Those human experiments he conducted in the underground laboratory 20 years ago were not for any medical breakthroughs at all. He was using living people to feed his energy body. I stared at the silver pendant that peeked out from his collar. It was the same necklace that Victor's late wife wore in the family photo in his study. So the light film just now was an energy barrier. Leah pulled off her coat sleeve and bandaged the bleeding back of my hand. Things that are nurtured with the energy of living people cannot be broken by physical attacks, but the energy barrier needs to maintain the frequency. I suddenly remembered the abandoned laboratory I saw on the 3rd underground floor 3 days ago. We followed the clues and climbed over the experimental log on half of the wall. In the glass cabinet were rusty coils and crooked metal tubes, with a label that read "Frequency Jammer Failed." Leah's fingers paused. "You mean those old devices that Victor eliminated? If he wants to maintain the new barrier, he'll have to use a higher level energy source." I supported myself against the wall and stood up. My joints ached as if they were soaked in ice water. The old equipment might be able to interfere with the frequency, just like using radio noise to cover up the radio signal. Adrian suddenly grabbed my arm. His palms were full of sweat. The laboratory door is sealed in Area C on the 3rd floor of the basement, but I know the password. He stared at the peeling wall in the distance. My dad goes there every Wednesday night and talks to my mom's laboratory table. As we crouched down and ran to the 3rd underground floor, the falling rocks from the ceiling became more and more frequent. A half-person, high cement block fell at Leah's feet. She pulled me into the emergency passage next to her. The end of her hair brushed my chin. "Remember you said that 20 years ago when you were hiding under the bed? You heard your mother shouting, 'Go to the attic.'" Her breath sprayed in my ears. "You were only 7 years old at that time. How come you remember it so clearly?" Whisper of the dead. I pulled her along and continued running down. The tinnitus brought on by aging suddenly intensified. I touched that hairpin. It was a blue butterfly hairpin, stained with the blood from my mother's temple. Adrian braked suddenly in front, and the emergency light above the metal door flickered. He quickly pressed the combination lock with his fingertips. 3792. The lock core popped open with a click, and the smell of mold and rust came out. The instruments in the laboratory were covered with thick dust, and in the glass cabinet against the wall lay several devices that looked like antique radios, and the outer shell was engraved with the same purple-blue patterns as on the optical film. This is the first generation of energy converter. Adrian lifted the oilcloth covering the operating table, revealing a metal plate covered with interfaces. My father wrote in his notes that this device can convert electromagnetic waves in the environment into, well, some kind of energy he needs. If used the other way around, interference frequency. Leah was already squatting on the ground, dismantling an old instrument, with black oil all over her fingernails. We need coils, capacitors, and this. She held up a thumb-sized crystal. The purple-blue color on the edge of the light film is the spectral characteristic of cesium-lithium crystals. Victor must have used this thing as a frequency anchor point. We began to frantically search for parts. I removed the wires from the wall while Leah scraped off the insulation with broken glass. Adrian fished out half a box of screws from the ventilation duct, not noticing that his fingertips were cut by the rusty iron. A block of cement from the ceiling hit the door of the laboratory. In the dust that was raised, I saw a light blue mark behind Leah's ear. It was exactly the same shape as the family birthmark on the autopsy report of his deceased wife that Victor showed us. Okay. Leah wrapped the last wire around the converter, the crystal glowing coldly in her palm. Someone needs to put it close to the barrier. I'll go. I grabbed the converter. The dizziness brought by aging suddenly came over me and my vision went black for 2 seconds. Just as Leah was about to speak, Adrian grabbed her arm and said, "His ability can sense energy fluctuations," and he glanced at the white hair on my temples. He has been waiting for this day for 20 years. As I crouched down and ran down the corridor, I could hear Leah's screams being crushed by falling rocks behind me. The light film was still there, like a breathing piece of purple jelly. The corridor outside had collapsed in half, and the steel bars were twisted like a dying snake. The converter became hot in my hand. I remembered the blue butterfly hairpin under the bed 20 years ago, and the bloody cuts on my adoptive father's back from the glass when he carried me out of the fire. Some debts must be repaid. Break it for me. I stuck the converter on the light film and pressed the switch. The purple-blue light film suddenly vibrated violently, like the surface of a lake into which a stone was thrown. The converter made a crackling sound of electricity. The crystal began to heat up. I smelled a burning smell, and the skin on my wrist was blistered. Spiderweb-like cracks appeared on the light film. I gritted my teeth and turned the power to maximum. Black fragments seeped out of the cracks, as if someone was tearing a piece of glowing cloth. Evan. Leah's hand suddenly grabbed my waist and pulled me back. The light film shattered in front of us, breaking into millions of purple-blue sparks, followed by a deafening roar. The entire sanatorium began to collapse from the bottom up, and we stumbled out. The ground behind us cracked as if it was alive, revealing a bottomless black hole. By the time we rolled onto the lawn, the entire building had turned into a giant pit. The night wind blew dust onto my face, and I saw a purple-blue mist coming out of the edge of the pit, like some living thing breathing. Leah knelt on the ground coughing, and Adrian slumped beside her, staring at the screen of his mobile phone. Victor's positioning signal disappeared at the last second before the collapse, leaving only a flashing red dot. He ran away. Adrian's voice was like crumpled paper. But there's something in the pit. My dad's lab is further down. I stood up on my knees and looked into the bottomless pit. There was a faint whiff of perfume on the wind. The same scent that Victor's office smelled of. The orange blossom scent that his late wife had used. The purple-blue light mist was still swirling in the pit, and a woman's laughter could be faintly heard, mixed with the sound of twisting metal. Leah suddenly grabbed my hand, and the pale blue birthmark behind her ear glowed faintly in the moonlight. Evan. Her voice was very soft. You said that Whisper of the Dead can read the last moments of life. If one day, Don't talk nonsense. I interrupted her and looked into the depths of the pit. There was something moving there, shadowy and like the outline of a person. Sirens sounded in the distance, but we all knew that the real trouble had just begun. I crouched at the edge of the collapsed hole, my fingertips sinking into the scorched grass. The night wind carried the smell of burnt metal and rushed into my throat. The purple-blue light mist was still swirling at the bottom of the pit, as if someone had buried broken neon bulbs underground. Leah squatted beside me, covering her mouth with her sleeve and coughing. The light blue birthmark behind her ear was soaked by the rain, and the color was so dark that it was almost indigo. We didn't notice when it started to rain. The sparse raindrops hit our faces, making us shiver. Adrian suddenly tugged at my coat. The screen of his mobile phone was glowing blue, and the red positioning dot had completely gone out, but his other hand was holding a crumpled piece of paper with blood on the corners. It was a fragment of a map that he had snatched from the safe in Victor's office. My dad has an old warehouse in the suburbs. His Adam's apple moved, and raindrops dripped onto the map along the ends of his hair. 10 years ago he said he wanted to transform it into a community library, but I once secretly looked through his diary. He lowered his voice. It said transfer of experiment num. Leah wiped the rain off her face, and a police badge flashed on her collar. Abandoned warehouses on the outskirts of Grey Harbor Town, the row closest to the lake. She took out a tactical flashlight and shone it on the map. The light fell on a coordinate circled 3 times in red. I checked last week when I was on patrol. There are new cameras installed on that wall, and the guard is a former Blackwater mercenary. I rubbed my swollen temples. The dull pain brought by aging seeped out from the gaps between the spine, as if someone was chiseling the bone marrow with a rusty chisel. Yesterday I spent an extra half hour reading the memories of the dead at the explosion site. The backs of my hands are now covered with age spots, and the face I see in the mirror would scare my own face from 20 years ago. But now the scent of orange blossom wafting from the bottom of the pit was growing stronger and stronger, sickly sweet, as if someone was sprinkling crushed orange petals into the air. It was the scent of Victor's late wife's perfume, which he always said was an anchor to the past. Let's go. I brushed off the dust on my trouser legs and stood up, my joints clicking. If he wants to restart the experiment, he'll need those anchors. The rain was falling heavily as Adrian's old pickup truck bumped along the bumpy dirt road. The wipers on the front windshield were squeaking. Leia was sitting in the passenger seat holding a shotgun. The barrel was still stained with engine oil from when she used it to deal with the mechanical guards. We encountered our first wave of traps in the woods about 3 miles away. Barbed steel mesh popped up from the ground, and we would have been minced to pieces if Adrian hadn't yelled, steering left. My dad always said that the best trap should be like a welcome ceremony. Adrian's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. When I was a child, he always took me to the amusement park. There were switchblades hidden in the pillars of the carousel, and the cotton candy machine's sugar threads were steel wires. He suddenly laughed. Later I realized that it was a game to train me to identify danger. The second wave of trouble was more direct. As we turned the last corner, 2 searchlights suddenly appeared from the roof of the abandoned gas station, and the beams of light cut through the rain like 2 white blades. 3 mechanical guards rolled out from behind the refueling tanker. Their round bodies were equipped with rotating machine guns, and their joints flashed the same purple-blue color as the light fog at the bottom of the pit. Get down. Leah dragged me into the gutter beside the road, and the roar of the shotgun drowned out the sound of rain. I reached for the Glock pistol at my waist, and the bullets hit the armor plates of the mechanical guards, splashing sparks. There were gaps in their joints. I pulled the trigger, and the 3rd bullet got stuck in the gear of my left knee. The sound of metal friction was so harsh that it made my teeth ache. Adrian picked up the wrench from the repair shop and rushed over. His shadow was shaking violently in the rain. The wrench hit the guard's camera, and blue sparks mixed with the rain made a crackling sound. By the time the last guard collapsed into a heap of scrap metal, My shirt was soaked with sweat. Leah tore off a piece of cloth to bandage the abrasion on my arm. Blood seeped out and formed a light red line in the rain. You should rest. Her voice was tense. You are in your current state. Once we catch Victor, I can sleep for a month. I interrupted her and looked up into the distance shrouded in rain. There was a blurry black shadow at the end of the horizon, like a giant beast crouching in the rain. It was a group of abandoned warehouses. The storm peaked as we approached the warehouse.
Lightning split the sky, illuminating the rusted tin roof and the faded words, Grey Harbor Steel.
The wind blew the rain whips on my face, and I could hardly open my eyes. I could only follow Adrian's back and move forward. His footprints were deeply sunk in the mud, as if he was playing tug-of-war with some invisible force. The entrance is behind the third container in the loading and unloading area. Adrian's voice was torn to pieces by the thunder. We stumbled around it, the rain pouring into our boots and making us shiver with cold. There was a secret door on the side of the container that almost blended in with the rust. Adrian took out a metal plate and stuck it on the keyhole. It was the access card he got from Victor's office. With a drop sound, the secret door cracked. The musty smell mixed with the sweet smell of some chemical agent came out, and I subconsciously reached for the holster. Leah's tactical flashlight reached in first, and the light swept across the wheel marks on the concrete floor and the empty reagent bottles piled at the foot of the wall. The letters on the labels were scraped away, leaving only the fragments of neuro. He's doing neural experiments here. Leah's voice was heavy. That light mist might be some kind of memory carrier. We had just taken 3 steps inside when all the sensor lights on the ceiling suddenly lit up. In the dazzling white light, the sound of metal friction came from all directions. Gun barrels popped out of the wall. Mechanical arms cracked out of the ground, and 12 black gun muzzles were pointed at our heads at the same time. "Welcome home, my little mice." Victor's voice came from the radio, still so elegant, as if inviting us to a tea party. "Do you think you can catch up with me? 20 years ago, I could make the entire Hastings family disappear. And now," he chuckled, "look at your feet." I lowered my head and saw a purple-blue light mist seeping out from the gaps between the floor tiles and crawling up my legs along my trouser legs. Leah grabbed my arm suddenly. Her hand was as cold as ice. "Evan, this fog, it's a memory carrier." My throat tightened. As the light mist spread over the back of my hand, I smelled the scent of orange blossom. Very strong, so strong that it was choking. In the distance I heard a woman's laughter, the same sound as that from the bottom of the pit, mixed with the crying of a baby, the sound of breaking glass, and my mother's last scream, which I heard while hiding in the closet on that rainy night, 20 years ago. The laughter on the radio changed its tone, turning into countless overlapping, distorted human voices. The gears of the robotic arm began to turn, and the muzzle of the gun sank slightly, aiming at our heart. The game has just begun. Victor's voice was torn apart by the noise, and you have already lost. The purple-blue light mist spread over my ankles. I heard Leah shouting something, and Adrian smashing the wall to find a switch. But all the sounds seemed to be through a layer of frosted glass. The rain was still falling, and through the high air vent I saw lightning lighting up the road outside the warehouse. There was a black car parked there, and the person in the driver's seat was wearing white gloves, raising a champagne glass and gently clinking it in our direction. "That's Victor." When the purple-blue light mist spread over my calves, my back teeth felt sore from biting them. The smell was like a rag soaked in orange blossom oil, mixed with the smell of rust, and went into my nostrils, reminding me of that rainy night, 20 years ago. My mother's pearl necklace rolled into the gap of the closet. The sound of blood dripping on the pearls overlapped with the rustling sound of the light mist rising at this moment. "Evan." Leah's pull almost dislocated my arm. She held the gun in her other hand, and the muzzle was shaking violently, not with fear but with anger. The new sheriff's badge glowed coldly in the mist. The steering frequency of these robotic arms is changing. 30 seconds ago they were sweeping the left side, now they are cross-covering. I stared at the nearest robotic arm. Water droplets condensed on the chrome-plated barrel. When the lightning flashed across the air window just now, I saw tiny gear patterns engraved on the inside of the barrel, exactly the same as the medical equipment mold donated to the town hospital by the Victor Charity Foundation last year. He modified it with medical machinery. I wiped the rain off my face. The joint pain brought by aging was like countless steel needles piercing my knees. The control system of medical equipment needs to be precisely synchronized, so the attack intervals of these mechanical arms.
It's 3 seconds!
Adrian suddenly shouted. The young man, who always polished his gold-rimmed glasses to a shine, was leaning against the wall, tapping his fingers rapidly in the cracks between the cement bricks. The one that pierced the ventilation duct just now, and the one that's aimed at Leah now, both firing within 3 seconds. He pushed his glasses up, his eyes behind the lenses brightening abnormally. I've seen my dad's laboratory system, and all linkage devices have master nodes. If the attack frequency is constant, the mastermind must be near the power lines. Leah and I said at the same time. The light mist has reached my waist. I can hear my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. Aging has made my heart like an old pump that has been in disrepair for a long time, and every beat is accompanied by noise. But at this moment, I calmed down, because I touched the blue fiber, taken from the victim's fingernails in my trouser pocket. The female corpse was found in an abandoned meat processing plant 3 days ago. In her memory, 30 seconds before her death, there was such a mechanical arm rotating above her head, and in the background sound was the hum of electric current passing through thick copper wires. Divide into 3 groups. I took off my coat and wrapped Leah's hands. Her palms were incredibly hot. It must be because she had scraped her skin when she smashed the wall with her bare hands. Adrian, you look for the circuit inspection port along the wall. Leah, keep an eye on the blind spots of the robotic arms, and shoot through their joints with your gun if necessary. I paused. The light mist had already spread to my chest. The strong smell of orange blossom made me dizzy. I need to get closer to the nearest robotic arm. Are you crazy? Leah's pupils shrank into needle points. Of course she knew that the light mist was the memory carrier collected by Victor. Every second I stayed in it, I would have to endure the death of others. But what's more dangerous is that when the light mist invades my skin, my whisper of the dead will be activated uncontrollably. Last time in the morgue, I just touched the dead man's wrist, and I was dragged into the last scene he saw before falling from the building. When I woke up, the corners of my eyes were covered with age spots. But what I need at this moment is this uncontrolled invasion. I let go of Leah's hand and walked towards the robotic arm. The nearest gun barrel was only half a meter away from my forehead. Water droplets condensed on the metal surface dripped into the light mist, making a sizzling sound. As the light mist spread over my collarbone, I heard the woman's laughter. Not the distorted overlapping sound on the radio, but a clearer, breathy laugh. Then came the sound of breaking glass, a baby crying, and my mother calling my name, like a needle piercing my temple. Evan Hastings. Victor's voice suddenly came from the barrel of the mechanical arm, with the gentleness of electric noise. The last thing your mother shouted was run. She was pinned against the fireplace, and the silver frame was smashed on the back of her neck. The picture in the frame was of you on your 7th birthday. I stumbled a step. The light mist had already spread over my throat. I could see Leah waving in the distance, her mouth forming the word stop. But the sound sounded like it was stuffed with cotton. Then I saw it. At the joint of the robotic arm, there was a very thin red paint mark, exactly the same as the mark in the female corpse's memory 3 days ago. That is the positioning symbol of the main brain node. All core equipment in Victor's private laboratory has such a mark. The mastermind is above the ventilation duct. I shouted at the top of my lungs. my voice as hoarse as sandpaper. The dizziness brought by aging suddenly surged up. I held the barrel of the mechanical arm, and the red paint on the metal surface rubbed against my palm. Adrian, find the inspection hole in the ceiling. Leah, break through the hydraulic rod of the third mechanical arm on the left. Leah's gun went off. The bullet embedded itself precisely into the elbow joint of the robotic arm, and the moment the hydraulic oil spurted out, the steering of all the robotic arms was stuck for half a second. That half a second was enough for Adrian to climb up the ventilation duct. His gold-rimmed glasses had fallen off at some point, and at this moment he was using a pen to pry the screws on the inspection port, moving as fast as a squirrel.
Found it. He pulled out a tangled mass of wires. This is the main fiber optic cable. All control signals go through here.
I stumbled towards Adrian. The light mist was still rising, but at this moment I could clearly hear the sound of the mechanical arms turning again. Their attack interval became 2 seconds, faster than before. Leah's gun was firing, and the bullets hit the mechanical arm, splashing sparks. The back of her police uniform had been soaked in light mist, appearing a strange purple-blue color. Cut the green wire, I yelled. In Victor's system, green is the master control.
Adrian's fingers flew over the wires.
There was still cement dust between his fingernails from when he smashed the wall, but now he was as steady as a precision instrument. With a click, the moment the green optical fiber was torn off, all the mechanical arms suddenly made a piercing buzzing sound, and the barrels all dropped to the ground. The light mist began to dissipate. I slid down to the ground, holding onto the wall, a sweet and fishy taste rising in my throat. The memory I had just forcibly read from the light fog made me 10 years older. The backs of my hands are now covered with age spots, and I barely have the strength to lift my head to look at Leah. Well done. Leah squatted down and wiped the blood from the corner of my mouth with the hem of her police uniform. Her hair was dripping with water and stuck to her pale face. But Victor won't give up so easily. Before he finished speaking, the base suddenly shook violently. The ventilation duct above my head made a creaking sound and broke, and dust fell down like snowflakes. Adrian staggered and held onto the wall. The cracks on the wall were extending at a speed visible to the naked eye. Self-destruct program. Adrian's voice was shaking. My father's laboratory. All the core areas have self-destruct devices. The countdown should be. The alarm suddenly sounded. Red lights were spinning in the base, and amid the shrill buzzing sounds, I heard the roar of an iron door closing. The half-open metal door that we had just entered through was now slowly closing. The rain that had leaked in through the gap in the door was cut off, and the last ray of sunlight disappeared behind the heavy steel. Leah yanked me up. Her hand was still so hot, but now it was like a pillar, supporting my shaky body. The exit is blocked. Her voice was very soft as a sigh. Evan, we have to before the explosion. The base shook again. This time, I couldn't hold on and my knees hit the ground hard. Leah also staggered and knelt beside me, our hands still clasped, and we could hear each other's rapid breathing. Adrian banged on the door, not far away. The sound of metal collision mixed with the sound of the alarm was very similar to the footsteps outside the closet on that rainy night 20 years ago. The purple-blue mist had completely dissipated, but the scent of orange blossom still lingered in the air. I looked up and saw lightning outside the transom illuminating Victor's black sedan. He was still sitting in the driver's seat, holding a champagne glass with white gloves, facing our direction, and gently touching the wall of the glass. The game has just begun. His voice came from the base radio, mixed with the noise of electricity, as gentle as saying goodnight. And you have just begun to lose. The base shook again. This time, I heard the sound of steel breaking. Leah's hand tightened in my palm, and Adrian's banging on the door suddenly stopped. He must have realized that this door could not be opened by ordinary means. The rain is still falling. Through the air vent I saw Victor raise his glass. Lightning flashed across his face, and I clearly saw the smile on the corner of his mouth. It was exactly the same smile as the man who stood in my living room on that rainy night 20 years ago. The alarm is still sounding. I counted my heartbeats and felt warm liquid flowing out of my nose. Was it blood from accelerated aging, or internal injuries caused by the self-destruct program? It doesn't matter anymore. The important thing is that, at this moment, we are trapped in a base that is about to explode. The heavy iron door blocks all escape routes, and Victor's outside, watching the countdown to our death. The alarm sounded like a rusty needle, drilling into my eardrum. The base shook again, this time more violently. I stumbled and bumped into the rusted iron frame, causing a sharp pain in my lower back. Leah had been holding my wrist, but this time she lost her grip and fell into the pile of rubble beside her. The ends of her hair were covered with cement dust, and when she looked up, her eyes were bloodshot. "Hold on!" Adrian's voice came from the other side of the door. He was just chopping the door with a fire axe, but now the axe blade was stuck in the gap of the door, and he was shocked to kneel on one knee. I saw blood oozing from his forehead, mixing with the rain and flowing down. The base's ventilation system had broken down long ago, and rain was leaking from the cracks in the ceiling, dripping onto the hot metal pipes, causing puffs of white mist to rise. The red light of the countdown danced on the wall. I squinted and saw that the number had jumped to. Victor had set the self-destruct sequence to last 10 minutes, but now there were only more than 3 minutes left. What's even more terrible is that after the earthquake just now, half a prefabricated panel fell from the ceiling and pressed on the emergency power supply in the corner. Sparks flew everywhere, and the burnt smell made it impossible to open one's eyes. The door is locked by electromagnetic force. Leah wiped the rain off her face and shouted at the top of her voice. She squatted in front of the combination lock, her nails scratching the scratches on the lock body. That was where Adrian hit it with the axe handle just now. The conventional cracking tools have been taken away by Victor. This lock model looks like military grade. I wiped my nose and my fingertips were covered in blood. The side effects of accelerated aging have come back again. My gums are bleeding, my temples are throbbing, and double images occasionally flash before my eyes. But what burns me most at this moment is not these, but the memory of that rainy night, 20 years ago. The same thunder, the same smell of blood. I huddled in the closet, and through the gap I saw the man in white gloves, raising a gun. My parents lying in a pool of blood, and when he turned around, his eyes just happened to sweep across the place where I was hiding. Wait. I suddenly grabbed Leah's arm. She had the usual smell of formaldehyde found in forensic laboratories mixed with rainwater, which was a bit pungent. I stared at the pile of discarded electronic equipment in the corner. I had noticed these things when we rushed in 3 hours ago. Broken monitors, old routers, rusted circuit boards. Those old devices I saw on the B2 floor before. Is it possible to dismantle the parts and make a signal jammer? Leah was stunned for a moment. Then she realized military electromagnetic locks rely on pulse signals. If you assemble a simple jammer out of old parts, you might be able to cut off the power supply to the lock cylinder. Adrian pulled out the fire axe and shook off the broken bricks on it. What do you need? I'll take it down. The three of us crouched and ran to the corner. Things were still falling from the ceiling. A fist-sized piece of cement grazed the back of my neck and fell to the ground. The splashing debris pierced the back of my hand, causing me to gasp in pain. Leah squatted in front of the electronic equipment, tapping her nails on a motherboard, capacitors, resistors, and this. She pulled off a piece of copper wire, antenna for an old router, for signal amplification. He dug out a broken monitor and smashed the back cover with the axe handle, revealing the circuit board inside. Metal fragments pierced into the palm of his hand, and blood dripped onto the circuit board, spreading into dark red flowers. But I didn't care about the pain, because the red countdown light had already jumped. Leah piled the disassembled parts on the iron rack. Rainwater dripped on the capacitors. She pulled off her tie and wiped it quickly. Adrian, go and remove 2 wires from the ventilation duct. Adrian responded and climbed up the crooked iron frame. His sneakers slipped on the wet metal, and my heart leapt into my throat, until he swore and pulled out 2 pieces of wire and threw them at me. Leah twisted the wire into a coil, put it on both ends of the capacitor, and wrapped the router antenna on it. Her fingers were shaking because of nervousness, but her movements were still precise. After all, she was someone who could pick up a 0.5 millimeter nerve with tweezers on the dissection table. Okay. She stuffed the assembled things into my hands. That thing was as ugly as a pile of scrap metal, and was stained with my blood. But at that moment, it was more precious to me than any precision instrument. I rushed to the combination lock and frantically pushed the jammer's interface into the inspection hole on the side of the lock body. There was a sudden sound of electricity, and blue-purple arcs appeared on the surface of the lock. The back of my hand was burned and smoking, but I gritted my teeth and didn't let go. Enter the password quickly, Leah shouted behind me. Then I remembered that the jammer can only cut off the power supply for 3 seconds, and I must enter the correct password within these 3 seconds. But what is the password? Victor set it up, and his password. Memories from 20 years ago suddenly came flooding back. I hid in the closet and heard the man on the phone. Coordinates confirmed. 1998-615. That day was my parents' wedding anniversary. Later I checked and found out that Victor's late wife died on June 5th. I yelled at the combination lock, my fingers typing frantically on the keyboard. The lock body makes a beep sound and the red indicator light turns green. Almost at the same time, the jammer burst into a series of sparks and was completely scrapped. Open! Adrian rushed over and pushed the door open. The iron door made a harsh friction sound and slowly opened a crack. The rain mixed with the wind poured in, bringing with it the fishy smell of the grass outside. The base was built in an abandoned factory outside the town, with a wild meadow behind it. I dragged Leah outside, and just as we stepped out of the door, we heard an earth-shaking roar behind us. The blast wave came from behind. I instinctively pushed Leah to the side and bumped into the concrete pier next to me. My eardrums buzzed and everything in front of my eyes turned white. When my vision returned, I was lying in the mud with my mouth full of blood and dirt. To my right was Leah, her hair disheveled, a hole burned through the sleeve of her police uniform, and she was coughing on her knees. Adrian was on the left. His clothes on the back were blown up by the airwave, revealing an old scar on his waist. It was the scratch he received from Victor's experimental subject when he was a child. Fuck! Adrian cursed and reached out to pull me. I held his hand and heard footsteps as he pulled me up. The rain was still falling, but this time there was another sound mixed in with the sound of the rain. A low, wild animal-like panting sound. I looked up and saw a man in a dark grey suit standing under an old locust tree 20 meters away. He held up an umbrella with silver ribs. Rain dripped down the edge of the umbrella and formed a small puddle at his feet. It's Victor. There were raindrops on his white gloves, and his other hand was in his trouser pocket, with that gentle smile on his face, as if he was attending a community charity gala. And beside him stood 3 things. The one on the far left was at least 2 meters tall, with bluish-gray skin and no eyeballs in his eye sockets, only 2 faint blue LED lights. The one in the middle looked more human, but his right hand had a metal claw, and the tips of his nails were dripping with some kind of yellow-green liquid. I recognized the one on the far right. It was the convenience store clerk who disappeared last week. He was still wearing the star necklace around his neck, but his eyes were empty at this moment, and his mouth was stretched from ear to ear, revealing 2 rows of sharpened teeth. Welcome to the final chapter. Victor's voice mixed with the sound of rain so clear that it seemed like it was right next to his ear. He took off his gloves, revealing a dark red scar on the back of his hand, exactly the same family mark as the one on the back of Leah's hand. The rain washed away the white hair in his hair, and I realized that his temples were completely white. But don't worry, I will make your death very ceremonial. Leah's hand tightened in my palm. Her fingers were cool, but steady. Adrian took out a folding knife from his trouser pocket, the blade gleaming coldly in the rain. My nose started bleeding again, dripping onto the muddy ground. The spreading red mark looked like a flower about to bloom. The little boy who curled up in the closet 20 years ago is now crawling out from the depths of my memory and gripping my heart. The experimental subject behind Victor began to move. The one on the far left took the first step, and his iron boots made a hole in the ground. I heard Leah inhale, and Adrian's knife trembled, but he didn't retreat. The rain was still falling, but I suddenly didn't feel cold anymore. The blood flowed from my nose into my mouth, and it tasted like rust. It reminded me of that rainy night 20 years ago when I held my mother's wedding ring and swore to make all those who had hurt my family pay the price. Victor was still laughing, but he didn't know that some seeds had been buried for 20 years and were about to sprout. The rain poured down the brim of my hat into my collar, making the back of my neck shiver with cold. The leftmost experimental subject had already walked 5 meters away from us, and the sound of his iron boots rolling over broken bricks sounded like knocking on my head. Its right arm was a mechanical prosthesis, and dark brown liquid oozed from the joints. I could smell it. It was hydraulic oil that hadn't been changed for a long time, mixed with the smell of rotten meat. There is a delay in their movements. I wiped the rain off my face, and drops of blood mixed with water dripped down from between my fingers. Suddenly, the rainy night 20 years ago flashed back in front of my eyes. When my mother stuffed me into the closet, her necklace got caught on the door, and the silver chain broke in two, one of which was stuck near where I was standing now. Just now, Victor raised his left hand, and the one on the left moved. He is in sync control. Leah pressed her thumb lightly on my palm, which was the received signal we agreed upon. Her other hand had already reached for the holster on her waist, but she stopped again. The subject's chest was bulging, and it might be filled with a bomb. In the gas station explosion late last year, a micro-detonator was stuffed into the victim's heart. Adrian's folding knife gleamed coldly in the rain, and the back of the knife was against his trembling palm. The kid who poured champagne for guests at Victor's charity gala last week is now fighting his father's works. My dad, he always said these were artworks, and that they could live on in the world for the dead. His Adam's apple rolled, but I saw them in the basement last week and they have metal joints on the back of their necks. Interface. I stared at the back of the nearest experimental subject's neck. The rain washed away its matted hair, revealing a scar 3 fingers wide, with a black iron disc the size of a coin embedded in the center of the scar. Thin wires from the edge of the disc crawled up the collar and disappeared into its blood-stained shirt, the source of the interference signal. I tore off my wet coat and threw it on the ground. The smell of blood suddenly became very strong. My nose was bleeding again. Every time I use Whisper of the Dead, I will age faster, but I can't care about that now. Adrian, lead the 2 on the right away. Leah, find a chance to get close to Victor. He must have had a controller with him. What about you? Leah's pupils shrank into needle points. She saw the wrinkles on my face when I used my ability just now. 2 more deep grooves appeared at the corners of my eyes. I'll be the bait. I smiled at her, revealing my bloody teeth. 20 years ago, my mother smiled like this. When she pressed the wedding ring into my palm, the warmth of her fingertips penetrated the metal and burned into my bones. Remember, you said I was like an old dog. The more pain I feel, the more I bite. The experiment subject's roar tore through the rain. The one on the far left swung its mechanical arm, and the wind blade scraped past my ear, cutting the tip of my ear. I stumbled and rolled behind a rusty iron barrel, and heard the sound of metal twisting. The barrel was beaten into thin sheets. Adrian's knife slashed the right subject's knee. Sparks flew, but only left a white mark on its leg. They have steel mesh under their skin, he shouted. Victor stood on a platform 20 meters away, holding an umbrella, his white shirt still straight. He raised his left hand towards me, and the subject on his left immediately turned around, aiming the mechanical arm at my hiding place. I took out the lighter from my pocket. I had picked it up when I passed the scrap heap just now, and the smell of gasoline was still lingering between my fingers. Now, I yelled and threw the lighter at the feet of the experimenter. Gasoline splashed on its iron boots, and I fished out the matchbox that Adrian had just stuffed into my hand. The moment it ignited, flames leaped up, illuminating the subject's face, which flickered. It was not a human face at all, but a face made of silicone and sutures. The left eye belonged to Victor's deceased wife, and the right eye belonged to the gas station worker, who disappeared last year. It was burned by the fire, and its robotic arm swung around wildly, knocking over the iron frame next to it. Amid the sound of falling steel pipes, I saw Leah running towards the platform, with her back bent, the rain reflecting on her police badge. Victor's expression finally changed. He took out a black remote control from his suit pocket, and pressed his thumb on the red button. Ultimate mode. Adrian suddenly screamed. The black disc on the neck of the right test subject began to flash red, and their movements suddenly became 3 times faster, with sharp teeth popping out of the robotic arms. One of them hit me in the stomach with his knee, and I flew out and hit the wall, my ribs breaking with a teeth-grinding sound. Blood flowed from the corners of his mouth into his collar, and I tasted rust, the same taste as my mother's blood 20 years ago. Evan! Leah's shout was drowned out by the subject's roar. I watched her as she was only 3 steps away from the platform. Victor's remote control was shining coldly in the rain. The subject on the right raised her serrated arm, aiming for the back of her neck. I gritted my teeth and climbed up, digging my nails into the mud. The little boy in the closet was shouting, telling me not to sleep, shouting that I wanted revenge. Whisper of the dead, I yelled. The pain came like a tide. My temple felt like it was going to split, and the scene in front of my eyes began to double. The memories of the experimental subjects flowed into their brains, along with the smell of blood. The last scene they saw before they died was Victor, wearing rubber gloves and pressing a black disc on the back of their necks. The last sound they heard was Victor's whisper, "Go to sleep, my work of art, and wait for my call." And the control frequency, the residual current frequency in their brains. Leah, I covered my mouth and coughed, blood spraying in the rain. Use your police walkie-talkie, 43.2 megahertz. Jam it. She was stunned for half a second, then immediately pulled down the walkie-talkie on her shoulder, and quickly dialed the frequency knob with her fingers. The subject's movement suddenly froze, and the serrated arm stopped 5 centimeters away from the back of her neck. Victor's face was completely distorted. He raised the remote control and smashed it at Leah's head, but it was too late. Leah's baton hit his wrist hard and the remote control fell into the mud. It's over. Leah stepped on his wrist and the handcuffs clicked shut. The black discs of the experimental subjects went out at the same time, and they fell straight into the mud like puppets with their strings cut. Adrian knelt on the ground, gasping for breath. The knife fell at his feet, and the blade was stained with the subject's blood. The blood was blue, and mixed with motor oil, but Victor was laughing. His laugh was like the cry of a night owl, penetrating the sound of rain, and drilling into my ears. Do you think this is the end? He tilted his head, and the rain dripped down his chin into the mud. Mr. Hastings, do you smell gas? I looked up suddenly. There was a faint stench in the wind. It was the smell of a natural gas leak. Leah's face turned pale instantly. She rushed to the iron cabinet behind the platform and kicked open the door. Inside was a red electronic timer, with numbers jumping in the rain. There are 50 kilograms of C4 buried under the entire factory. Victor's voice was as gentle as if he was saying goodnight, just like the bomb in your basement 20 years ago. Little Evan, Do you think you can find a closet to hide in this time? My nose started bleeding again, and the numbers in front of me became blurry. Leah dragged Victor out of the factory. Adrian picked up the remote and pressed it frantically, but the timer was still ticking. The rain poured into my collar, and I was shivering with cold, but this time, there was no chance for me to hide in the closet. The seeds planted 20 years ago have sprouted, and now, it's time to let them bloom. The red light of the timer reflected on the rain, just like the fire that engulfed the entire house that I saw through the crack in the closet that night. 20 years ago, 53. The rain flowed down the brim of my safety helmet and hit the back of my neck. I stared at the flickering red light of the timer. The moment 52 turned into 51, a sudden taste of rust rose in my throat. It was blood from my nose dripping into my collar. 20 years have passed, and that burnt smell is still embedded in my memory, intertwined with the stench of natural gas that permeates the air at this moment. Calm down. I bit my tongue, and the smell of blood dispelled the dizziness. The Tennessee waltz that my father always sang when defusing bombs 20 years ago suddenly rang in my ears, and his back, bending over to adjust the timer, was superimposed on the red device in front of me. Old school lunatics always have a backup plan. I shouted to Leo, rainwater pouring into my mouth. The bomb he installed in my basement 20 years ago had double insurance, and there must be one here too. Leah's police boots rolled over broken glass. She grabbed Victor by the back of his suit collar, and he twisted like a slippery eel, ramming his elbow into her ribs. I saw her pupils shrink to pinpoints, but she grabbed Victor's wrist with her backhand while stumbling. That was the starting position of the lock wrist and elbow in the police academy's grappling technique. Adrian, she panted and gave the young man a look. Take Evan to find the deactivation device, and leave the rest to me. Adrian Victor's Adam's apple moved. This tall and thin man who always sorted old newspapers in the community library was now clenching the steel bar he picked up from the ruins, his knuckles turning white. Follow me. He pulled me to the east side of the factory building, and the rain splashed muddy water at our feet. The timer jumps to... My right eyelid was twitching. This was a warning sign after overusing Whisper of the Dead last week in order to read the memory of the third victim in the serial case. I overdrew my lifespan by 3 hours. Now every step I took felt like I was walking on cotton. But when we pried open half of the collapsed brick wall, some familiar metallic reflection pierced our retinas. Wait, I grabbed Adrian's arm. In the pile of rubble, under half a rusty stone slab, was a black iron box with a withered heather carved on the lid. Exactly the same decoration as the one on the fireplace in my living room 20 years ago. My mother always said that it was a token of love that my father brought back from Italy, and later, it was blown to ashes, along with the whole house. It's here. I knelt down, not caring about the blood oozing from my nails, and desperately scratched the edge of the stone slab. Adrian immediately rushed over to help. Our hands slipped in the rain, and the stone slab finally fell over with a click. The dust on the iron box mixed with rainwater, revealing the dense wires underneath. Red, blue, and yellow. I read the wiring diagram on the inside of the iron box silently, and the words in my father's notes suddenly became clear. Old school bomb makers would use their wives' birthdays as a password. The blue line is the heartbeat, and the red is the artery. If you cut the wrong one, you're handing the knife to the god of death. Victor's laughter mixed with the sound of rain. I looked up and saw Leo was pressed on the rusty assembly line operation table. Victor's fingers pinched the back of her neck, and his other hand grabbed the wrench on the table. Little sheriff, you are so much like your grandmother. His voice was like a snake's tongue. She was like this back then too, holding a scalpel and saying she wanted to dissect my secrets. Shut up. Leah slammed her knee into his abdomen, and while he was hunched over, she grabbed his wrist and sent a wrench clanging to the ground. But Victor's other hand had already reached for the pistol at her waist. I saw her pupils shrink suddenly, which was the fear of realizing that the other party was going to take the gun and commit suicide. Hurry. Adrian's voice was filled with tears. I looked down at the iron box, and the timer showed. On the chip wrapped with blue thread was engraved 1965-03-12. That was the birthday of Victor's late wife, which I had seen in a group photo at a community charity dinner, with my finger hovering over the blue line. I remembered that this string of numbers also flashed through the memory of the third victim in the morgue last week before his death. At the moment of cutting, the lights in the entire factory suddenly flashed. The red light of the timer flashed violently at first, and then with a ding sound, the number stopped at done. Adrian yelled. I staggered to my feet, but my attention was drawn to the movement from Leah's side. Victor's forehead hit the edge of the operating table. Blood flowed down his gray hair, and Leah rode on his waist and tied his hands behind his back.
Adrian rushed over and tied his father's wrists with the cable ties he took out from the iron box.
It's over. Leah wiped the rain and blood off her face, the muzzle of the gun still against Victor's temple. There was a tear in her police uniform, revealing a light blue mark on her collarbone. Exactly the same totem as the one on the back of the serial murder victim. I was about to speak when Victor suddenly laughed, and blood foam oozed from the corners of his grinning mouth. Little Evan, do you think you can win by taking apart a toy? His pupils were dilated due to blood loss, but they were frighteningly bright. Do you see the old oak tree outside the factory? See those waste oil tanks behind the warehouse? He coughed. 5 kilograms buried under each tree, each tank with a timer. My ears suddenly started buzzing. Leah suddenly turned her head and looked out the window. In the rain, I saw traces of freshly turned soil under the old oak tree in the distance. Adrian's face turned as pale as a sheet of paper in an instant. He rushed towards the factory gate, but stopped the moment he touched the door handle. Through the glass, he could see 7 red timers ticking simultaneously on the cement floor under the porch. 31:50. The rain flowed down my chin and hit the ground, mixing with Victor's blood, forming a dark red pool at my feet. Leah's hands were shaking not because of fear, but because of extreme anger. Adrian's Adam's apple moved, and whatever he wanted to say was drowned out by the sound of rain. And Victor was still laughing. His laughter mixed with the sound of rain, just like the faint humming coming from the fire that night 20 years ago when I was hiding in the closet. Kids, he said, it's time to run now. The rain fell on the ground along the iron roof of the factory building, making a dense drumbeat sound. I stared at the red numbers jumping under the porch. 31 minutes and 20 seconds. Every time the second hand ticked, a layer of cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Victor's laughter was like a rusty needle, piercing my temple. The stormy night, 20 years ago, suddenly flashed back in front of my eyes. The flames licked the wallpaper. My mother's pearl necklace shattered in the fire. I curled up in the deepest part of the closet, listening to the footsteps outside the door and humming Green Sleeves. Escape route. Adrian suddenly grabbed my arm. His hand was as cold as ice. When my father's underground base was built 30 years ago, an emergency exit was left. It's in the storage room, behind the boiler room. His Adam's apple rolled. On my 12th birthday, I secretly looked through his design drawings. Leah had already picked up the fire axe from the corner, and the rain was running down the shoulder straps of her police uniform. Lead the way. We crouched as we made our way through the broken glass. Victor was still slumped in his chair, his white shirt stained dark red by his blood. He stared at my back and smiled. The sound from between his teeth mixed with the sound of rain. Run faster, little Evan. Your mother also ran. I paused, digging my nails into my palms. On that rainy night, 20 years ago, it was under the carpet in this corridor that I touched my mother's blood-stained pearls. The smell of rust mixed with damp and mold from the boiler room rushed into my nostrils. Adrian used his sleeve to wipe away the water stains on the wall, revealing an iron plate half a person's height, with fine scratches on the edge. It was a combination lock. This lock was custom made by my father from Switzerland. Adrian pulled off the silver chain on his collar. The pendant was a miniature flashlight, and the beam of light swept across the lock. Mechanical dial type. 3 groups of numbers, 4 digits each. His voice trembled. I only remember him saying it was related to the date, 30 minutes and 15 seconds. The red light of the timer cast a dancing shadow on the iron plate. I reached behind my waist, where I saw the pistol I had seized from the guard. The barrel of the gun still had body temperature, reminding me of the guard who was shot in the knee by Leah half an hour ago. As he fell in a pool of blood, his eyes were still fixed on the wall. Whisper of the dead. I gritted my teeth and muttered to myself, pressing my fingertips on my temples. The moment the ability was activated, my back teeth felt like they were hit by a hammer, and snowflakes flashed before my eyes. The guard's last moments came flooding in. He was lying on the ground, looking at the lock on the iron plate, his lips moving as he counted. 1987 1, 2 2. Leah's fingers stroked the raised gears on the lock. But if it's 3 groups of 4... She paused and tapped the edge of the iron plate with the butt of the gun. Look here. The spacing of the scratches. The first group has 4 teeth deep. The second group has 3. And the third group has 5. It may be a segmentation hint. I stared at the last image in the guard's memory. Victor's face reflected in his pupils. And the old man held up his pocket watch and said, "Remember my anniversary. Wedding anniversary." Adrian suddenly said. Father and mother got married on November 22, 1987. His hands were shaking as he grasped the lock plate. But mother died on May 7, 29 minutes and 30 seconds. My knees began to ache, a sign of accelerated aging. Every time I used my energy, it was like a spring was being taken out of my body. The sleeves of Leah's police uniform were rolled up to her elbows, revealing an old scar on her exposed wrist, which was caused by broken glass when she was chasing a drug dealer last week. Now there was a thin scab formed. Was she also aging rapidly? No, my perception of time is messed up. 1987 Lisbon and 22, 19 does 51:17. Leah quickly turned the dial. The first group went to 1987. The second group to 1122, the third group. She suddenly stopped. Wait, if there are 3 groups of 4 digits, then 1995 as a 517 is 8 digits. It should be split into 1995 and... No. I stared at Victor's pocket watch in the guard's memory. On the inside of the watch cover were engraved the initials E.M. Emily Marlowe, the name of his late wife. Emily's birthday, I blurted out. Adrian, when is your mother's birthday? March 4th. Adrian's voice suddenly fell silent. March 4th, 28 minutes and 47 seconds. Leah's fingers almost deformed the lock dial. She turned the first set, 1963. Emily's birth year. The second set, 034. Birthday. The third set. I stared at the last number in the guard's memory. He stared at the lock in pain, and his lips moved. 102. Victor's wedding anniversary.
1863? 030, 122. Leah slammed the lock.
With a click, the iron plate slid back half a foot, revealing a dark tunnel. The smell of mold and rust hit me in the face. Let's go. I pushed Adrian in first, and Leah followed behind. The tunnel was so low that one could only bend over. Water was seeping from the walls, and the gravel underfoot hurt the soles of one's feet. The red light of the timer shone through the gap in the iron plate. 27 minutes and 15 seconds. 27 minutes and 14 seconds. Wait. Leah suddenly grabbed my arm, her gun already loaded. There are footsteps behind us. The echo in the tunnel was amplified by the damp walls. There was indeed the sound of dragging footsteps, mixed with the sound of metal rubbing against each other. The heels of leather shoes scraping against gravel. James Parker. Adrian's voice sounded like he was being strangled. Father's personal lawyer. He knows all the secrets. A little light appeared at the end of the tunnel, which was the air vent of the exit. The footsteps were getting closer. and I saw a flash of silver in the shadows. It was the barrel of a gun. "Stop." James's voice was asthmatic. He was dressed in a suit, and his collar was stained with blood. "Put down the gun, or I will shoot you now." The muzzle of his gun was pointed at the back of Adrian's head. Adrian froze in place, his back pressed against my chest. I could hear his heart beating as fast as a pile driver. "Aren't you afraid of bombs?" I stared into James's eyes, his pupils trembling. "There are still 25 minutes left. The C4 under the old oak tree, and the TNT in the oil tank will blow up the entire base within a radius of 500 meters. I deliberately raised my voice. "Do you think Victor will let you live? It was you who cleaned the gun in the murder case and handled the fingerprints. He has long regarded you as a pawn." James's Adam's apple moved, and the muzzle of the gun drooped slightly. I glimpsed Leah half a step to my right, her fingers resting on her tactical belt, where she held the telescoping baton. 24 minutes and 30 seconds. I stared at my watch, and deliberately spoke clearly for the sound of the second hand. "It will take 20 minutes for the Huigang Town Fire Department to arrive. Even if you run now, you won't be able to make it." "Shut up," James yelled, turning the gun towards me. His hands were shaking, and I saw a purple birthmark on his wrist bone, shaped like a maple leaf. It matched the outline of the bloody fingerprint on the windowsill in the photo of the scene taken 20 years ago. It was him, the one who set fire to my door. My temples were throbbing, and the after effects of Whisper of the Dead began to take effect. The image of James in front of me became two. Leah's baton snapped away, and I dove for James's gun hand. The gun went off and the bullet grazed my ear and flew into the wall. Leah's baton hit his wrist. The sound of metal collision mixed with his screams. Adrian took the opportunity to hit him in the stomach, and the three of them rolled into a ball. I reached for the spare gun at his waist and fired a shot at the ceiling. In the echo, James suddenly collapsed and stared at the timer at the tunnel entrance. 23 minutes and 17 seconds. "Run." Leah pulled me towards the exit. The air vent was rusted shut, so she hit it 3 times with her baton, and the glass shattered into pieces. I climbed out first, and the rain poured down on my head. Adrian came out first, and then Leah. There was a cut on the back of her hand from the glass, and blood mixed with rainwater was dripping down. We stumbled across the lawn, where the new earth beneath the old oak tree was black in the rain. The red light of the timer was still ticking. 22 minutes and 50 seconds. 22 minutes and 49 seconds. "Run out of town." Adrian pointed to the road in the distance, but as we rushed up the slope, I suddenly stopped. The outline of Huigang Town looks wrong in the rain and fog. The old church spire that was usually visible was gone, replaced by an abandoned water tower, covered with ivy. The gas station in my memory had turned into a wild meadow, with only a rusty grey Harbour Town welcomes you sign leaning in the mud. This isn't Grey Harbour Town." Leah wiped the rain off her face. "We're clearly at the old steel mill in the east of the town." "How come?" There was a muffled sound behind me. The timer in the direction of the base had reset to 0. Flames shot up into the sky, dyeing the rain clouds blood red. In the firelight I saw the words engraved on the back of the sign. The rain washed away the mud, revealing the faded paint. "Welcome to the Forgotten Valley, the shadow of Greyhaven." The rain pierced the back of my neck like knives. I wiped the water off my face, and my Adam's apple moved. The shadow of the old water tower fell, and the ivy covered with it rustled in the wind like countless green hands. Leah's wound was still bleeding. She tore off the sleeve of her police uniform and wrapped it around her wound twice. The blood quickly spread into a dark red flower. Adrian held my arm. The warmth of his palm seeped through the wet shirt. This boy's hands were shaking. Was he angry or afraid? "Let's find a place to hide first." Leah tugged at her collar, the rain running down her collarbone. "Victor and James are still behind us." She nodded her chin down the slope. "When we escaped just now, The two old guys were tied to the water pipes on the outer wall of the base by Adrian with cable ties. They should still be soaking in the rain now. Interrogate them first. I started coughing, and my lungs felt like they were filled with a ball of wet cotton. The feeling of aging is worse than before. My kneecaps ache and tremble, and I always see things as if through a layer of frosted glass. When I was climbing up the air vent just now, I clearly heard the crisp sound of my knuckles, like the tenons of old furniture about to fall apart. Adrian pursed his lips and said nothing. His father, Victor Marlowe, the philanthropist who always wore three-piece suits to town meetings and donated Christmas gifts to orphanages, was now tied up in the rain, his silver hair plastered to his scalp, his suit soaked through, like a scaled fish. But his eyes were still bright, like two small lights, staring at us in the rain. James Parker huddled at his feet. This old fox who had been Victor's personal lawyer for 20 years was now trembling all over. His gold-rimmed glasses were nowhere to be found, and the tip of his nose was covered in mud. When he saw me approaching, he suddenly shouted at the top of his voice, Evan, listen to me." Victor forced me to do it. That incident back then. Shut up. I squatted down, and the rain hit his shoulders along my chin. My fingers pressed on the artery in his wrist, and the moment our skin touched, memories flooded in like a tide. In the autumn of 1997, it was raining in Huigangtown just like it is today. James's leather shoes stepped on the broken glass on the ground. He held up the hurricane lantern, and in the halo of light were 5 corpses. Old Mrs. Hastings still held the cross in her hand, and Evan's crib was empty. The 5-year-old boy was hiding in some cupboard, watching him through the crack in the door. "Where's the money?" Victor's voice came from behind. He was dressed in a suit and tie, and even his cufflinks were not stained with blood. He kicked the tip of his leather shoe against the chest of old Hastings. "You said he hid the gold from World War II. But there's not even a piece of gold found in this broken house." James wiped the sweat off his face and said, "I swear when old Hastings was a porter at the dock, he saw the Nazi submarine sinking in Grey Harbor with his own eyes. He said the blueprints were in the attic." "Attic?" Victor suddenly laughed. He took off his white gloves and wiped the rain off James's face carelessly. "You should have said it earlier, Mr. Lawyer." He turned and walked towards the stairs, his leather heels tapping on the wooden board. "Go find that little bastard. He must know where the blueprints are." I suddenly let go, and James curled up and retched like a dog whose tail was stepped on. Leah held my shoulders, her hands were cold. "Evan, what do you see? The family was murdered that year." I licked my bitter lips. The smell of rain mixed with rust. My parents, grandparents. They didn't die in a home robbery. It was Victor who was looking for the drawings of Nazi gold. I hid in the closet and listened to them rummaging through the closet. Adrian suddenly grabbed my wrist. "So my dad, he's been looking for that batch of gold. But 20 years ago he was just a freshly graduated college student, because of his wife." James suddenly raised his head, the rain running down his wrinkles. "Mrs. Marlowe has ALS. The doctor said she has 3 years to live at most." Victor was frantically looking for money, saying he wanted to go to Switzerland to do some cell experiments. "There's a mention of that gold in old Hastings' shipping records." "Shut up," Victor said suddenly, his voice like an icicle. He struggled with the straps, rain dripping down his jawline. "Adrian, you should know that Daddy did all this to save your mom." "To save her?" Adrian's voice was shaking. "So you killed Evan's family? So you've been killing people in Grey Harbor for the past 20 years, and taking their organs for experiments?" He suddenly picked up a broken brick and smashed it at Victor's feet. "If Mom knew you'd become like this, she would. She already knows." Victor's voice was as light as a sigh. "She lay in bed for 10 years, and the last thing she said was to ask me to stop. But I can't stop, Adrian. As long as I find that batch of gold, I can build a better laboratory, and maybe that's enough." Leah interrupted him. She squatted down and put her fingertips on Victor's Adam's apple. What about Evan's aging? Did you provide Rachel Wu with the medicine? Rachel. Victor laughed. That woman is greedier than I am. She knew the side effects of Whisper of the Dead, so she raised the price every time. But now, he glanced at the fire in the distance. The base exploded and her laboratory is gone.
I'm afraid there's no cure for Evan's aging.
I feel a soreness in my back teeth. The speed of aging is twice as fast as before. It took me 10 minutes to read James's memory just now. If I look in the mirror now, I can probably see a few more strands of white hair on my temples. Leah's hand was still holding me, and I could hear her heartbeat, beat by beat, like the sound of a drum. Someone is coming. Adrian suddenly lowered his voice. The sound of a car engine came from the rain, and the headlights cut through the rain and mist. It was a silver Lexus. The car door opened and Rachel Wu walked out holding a black umbrella. Her red high heels looked like 2 drops of blood in the mud.
Detective Evan.
She was wearing burgundy lipstick and her pearly teeth were showing when she smiled.
I heard the base was bombed.
What a pity I arrived just in time for the fun. How did you find this place? Leah stood up with her hand on the pistol at her waist. Greyhaven and Forgotten Valley are twin towns. Rachel shook the water off her umbrella. Victor's laboratory can open up a passage between the 2 towns. I installed trackers on you. Don't look at me like that. You always have to keep a backup plan when doing business. She glanced at me. You're in a bad situation, right? Your skin will sag. Your pupils will become cloudy. If you hold on for another 3 days, you will turn into a 90-year-old man. Do you have medicine? I straightened up, my joints crackling. Yes. Rachel pulled a silver syringe out of her bag and shook it in the rain. But the price has gone up. How many? $2 million. Leah sneered. We just bombed Victor's base. Where can we get 2 million? So I'll give you another option. Rachel walked up to Victor, squatted down and pinched his chin. He hid the exact location of the gold, as well as the channel map of Twin Town. You give me these and I'll give Evan the shot for free. Victor's pupils shrank. Adrian suddenly grabbed Rachel's wrist. You can't. Calm down. I held Adrian's shoulder. Victor, your daughter's grave is in the church west of the town, right? I sent you white roses every year, on your death anniversary. I stared into Victor's eyes. I hid the gold drawings in a secret compartment in the closet. You didn't find it because I stuffed it into the doll's belly. Victor's face changed. Rachel pressed her fingers on the back of his neck, and he suddenly groaned. A small crack appeared in the skin on his neck, and some blood oozed out. That was the interface of the implanted memory chip. Smart. Rachel stood up and handed me the syringe. Now you can get the injection. I shuddered as the injection pushed into my blood vessels. A warm current rushed from my arms to the top of my head, and the double image in front of my eyes slowly dissipated. I touched my face. My skin no longer felt like sandpaper, and the pain in my knuckles was less severe. The drug's effect only lasts for a week. Rachel put away the empty syringe. After a week, I want the exact coordinates of the gold. She turned and walked towards the car, her high heels making a series of small pits in the mud. Have fun. Leah suddenly grabbed my arm and said, Evan, look over there. Victor didn't know when he broke free from the straps. He was kneeling in the mud, holding a black briefcase in his arms, the same one that had been at James's feet moments ago. James collapsed on the ground. His Adam's apple moved, and his eyes were unfocused. There was a thin blood stain on his neck, which was caused by Victor using broken glass. Dad! Adrian rushed over, but Victor had already gotten up and stumbled towards the road. His suit was torn, revealing the white shirt underneath. There was a large blood stain on the back, and it was unclear whether it was James's or his own. Stop. Leah drew her gun, but the rain was too heavy, and the crosshairs of the gun kept shaking. Victor got into an old Ford on the side of the road. The engine roared as it sped out. The taillights turned into 2 small red dots in the rain and fog, and soon disappeared. I slowly sat down, holding onto the brick wall of the water tower. Rainwater flowed down the cracks between the bricks and dripped into the mud at my feet. Leah crouched down to check James's pulse and shook her head. Adrian stood in the rain, looking in the direction where his father disappeared, his shoulders twitching. "What did he take?" I asked. "Experimental data." Leah flipped through the documents in James's arms. The rain had wrinkled the pages. It says energy cycle of twin towns, feasibility of memory transplantation. Evan, Victor's conspiracy may have just begun. The wind blew the rain towards me, and I squinted my eyes. The water tower in the distance appeared and disappeared in the rain, like a huge tombstone. The feeling of aging has temporarily subsided, but the dull pain in my heart has become more obvious. I finally know who destroyed my family that year, but the murderer is now disappearing in the rain with an even crazier plan. Leah put her hand on my shoulder. "We'll catch up with him." I nodded, but my throat felt like it was clogged with ice. The rain was still falling, getting heavier, drowning out all the sounds. Only the roar of Victor's car was still ringing in my ears, like a thorn piercing into my bones. The rain poured down the brim of my hat and hit the back of my neck. I wiped the water off my face and slowly stood up, leaning on my knees with my knuckles. James's body was curled up in the rain. The bullet hole on the chest of his suit was still oozing blood, mixed with rainwater and leaving dark brown marks on the mud. That was the shot Victor fired before he left, to ensure that his lawyer would never be able to speak. "Evan?" Leah's voice floated over with the raindrops. She had already stuffed the documents in James's arms into a waterproof bag. The ends of her hair were dripping with water, and the police badge flashed on her collar. "What are you thinking about?" I stared at the road in the distance, blurred by the rain. Victor's tire tracks had long been washed away to just a few muddy grooves. The ventilation duct in the laboratory. I pulled at my wrinkled shirt. The skin on the back of my neck felt like it had been rubbed by sandpaper, a sign of accelerated aging. When I climbed in last week, I found fresh oil stains in the duct. Adrian suddenly raised his head. His eyelashes were covered with water drops, like a young animal wet by the rain. My father always said that the real secrets are hidden in the most conspicuous ruins. He wiped his face. The old steel mill east of Grey Harbor Town stopped production 10 years ago, but he always asks the driver to take a detour past it every month. Leah tapped her fingers on the waterproof bag twice. Twin Town energy cycle. The boiler system of the old steel plant was a double-circuit design. She handed me the file bag, and the warmth of her palm came through the wet cloth. "Evan, you guessed right." I looked down at my watch. 2:17 in the morning. The fatigue brought by aging is like a ball of wet cotton stuck in my temples, but I still managed to smile. Action separately. You and I will go to the old steel mill, and Adrian will go to the warehouse area to the south, where James checked the surveillance last week. "I want to be with you." Adrian's voice was choked with sobs. "He is my father. No." Leah interrupted him, slapping the gun into his hand. "You know his tricks better than we do. If the old steel mill is a cover, and the warehouse area is the real target, you have to keep an eye on it for us." Adrian clenched the handle of the gun, his knuckles turning white. As the rain eased and he disappeared around the corner, I heard him whisper, "If he's there, I'll catch him myself." The iron gate of the old steel plant was hung with a rusty chain. I poked it 3 times with the key I found on James's body before it opened it. The screaming of the door hinges bumped around in the empty factory area, startling a few crows, which fluttered past the broken glass windows. "Watch your step." Leah's flashlight beam swept across the ground, trampling the weeds growing out of the cement cracks. "Someone has been here recently." My heel rolled over a piece of broken glass, and the crisp sound made my spine tense. The ability of the whisper of the dead jumped at his temple. The scene that the guard who was silenced by Victor in the laboratory last week saw before his death suddenly came to his mind. Metal gears, a console with a cold light, and time loop written in red paint on the wall. This way. I pulled Leah's sleeve and walked deeper into the factory. When we passed a row of abandoned blast furnaces, she suddenly grabbed me. Listen. The sound of metal rubbing came from above my head. I looked up and saw a red light flashing in the shadows of the ventilation duct. A camera. Get down. The sound of Leah's gunshot and the buzzing of the machine exploded at the same time. 3 half-human high mechanical guards descended from the mouth of the pipe. Their silver shells reflected the light of the flashlight. When the searchlight on their heads swept over us, I smelled the smell of burnt ozone.
Their sensor is in the right eye, I yelled, my voice cut off by the roar of the guards' laser cannons.
A laser beam grazed my shoulder. The fabric instantly charred, and my skin felt a burning pain. Whisper of the Dead automatically started, and the guard's memory fragments came in. Target movement speed, attack mode. I threw myself towards the scrap metal pile on the left, while Leah rolled towards the operating table on the right. The joints of the mechanical guards made a clicking sound, and one of them turned towards me. The red light of the laser cannon locked onto my chest. Evan. Leah's second shot accurately shattered the guard's right eye, and the red light suddenly went out. I took the opportunity to pick up a rusty iron plate and smash it against the other statue's knee. With the sound of metal collision, the guard's balance system collapsed instantly, and he fell heavily to the ground. The third guard aimed its laser cannon at Leia. She hid behind the operating table, and the empty sound of the bullets being fired made my throat tighten. I grabbed the wrench on the ground and threw it with all my strength. The wrench scraped past the guard's neck, hit the wall and bounced back, hitting its sensor squarely. The 3 guards fell silent at the same time, and green smoke came out of their shells. Leah poked her head out from behind the operating table. There was a bloody scratch on her forehead, but she smiled as if she had just won a bet. When did you learn to throw a wrench? I learned it from the guard who was killed by Victor last week. I pulled off the corner of my clothes and pressed it on the wound on my shoulder. The smell of blood suddenly rushed into my nose. He was a mechanic when he was alive. In the last second before he died, he was still thinking about how to dismantle these pieces of junk. We continued to walk deeper into the factory, and the smell of engine oil in the air became stronger the further we went. In the innermost warehouse area, I kicked a metal box. When I opened it, I saw that it was half a box of memory chips, with Lucas Morrison Laboratory printed on the cover. Is this? Leah ran her fingers over the chip. The notes of the neuroscientist that Victor imprisoned. I pulled out a yellowed piece of paper with frantic handwriting on it. Memory transplantation will cause the recipient's perception of time to become confused. When the number of transplants exceeds 7, the subject will fall into a loop. The energy system of Twin Town can maintain this cycle. Just like building a prison for ghosts, time is closed. I looked up. Leah's face was paler than the rain. He wants to keep the memories of the dead trapped in the world forever, and use this method to extend his wife's life. The ground suddenly shook. I staggered and held onto the shelf. The iron ceiling above my head groaned under the weight. Self-destruct sequence. Leah dragged me to the door. He must have set a trigger. As we stumbled out of the factory, we heard a loud bang behind us. Looking back, I saw the chimney of the old steel plant collapsing, bricks and steel bars falling like a rainstorm, and in the rising dust, I saw half of a rusty iron sign with the words Twin Town smashed into the ruins. The phone vibrated in my pocket. I wiped the dust off my face and pressed the answer button. Adrian's voice came over with an electric noise. Evan, I found my father's car in the warehouse area. His words were drowned out by the sound of police sirens. Leah's hand was on my back, the warmth coming through my dusty shirt. The sky in the distance was turning pale, but the back of my neck began to feel hot again. The feeling of aging came back, more intense than ever. What else did he say? Leah asked. I put the phone close to my ear, but all I could hear was the hissing of electricity. The dust gradually dissipated, revealing half a metal pipe in the ruins, glowing coldly in the morning light, like some kind of ancient tombstone, and Adrian's voice suddenly became clear, and he left this. I gripped the phone tightly, hearing my own heartbeat drowning out everything else. The phone was vibrating numbly in my palm. When Adrian's voice suddenly became clear, I was staring at the piece of cold metal pipe in the ruins. It looked very much like the gun barrel I saw through the gap when I was curled up in the closet 20 years ago. The laboratory is in the basement of the old water plant, and the entrance is in the third sedimentation tank. His breathing was heavy, and there was a harsh sound of metal friction in the background. I hacked into my father's dashcam, and the navigation destination coordinates are 42. Leah tapped her fingers twice on my wrist, and I knew she was checking in on me. The burning sensation at the back of my neck has spread to behind my ears, and the new wrinkle on the mirror is extending down along my cheekbone. This is the price I paid for reading the guard's memory using Whisper of the Dead for the third time. With every additional hour, my skin will become like old bark that has been drained of moisture. You should have stayed in the car. I turned to Leah, her police badge gleaming coldly in the morning mist. The laboratory's defense system was designed by Lucas Morrison, the guy who was able to hack into the CIA's neural interface. Ordinary firearms can't break through it, and you need someone who can carry you and run. She pulled off her police uniform jacket, revealing the tactical vest underneath. Last time at the junkyard, if I hadn't held you back, you would have been a tombstone along with that pile of steel bars. Adrian's car was parked in the birch forest outside the water plant. He was squatting on the hood, disassembling a modified Glock pistol. When he saw us, his Adam's apple moved, and the muzzle of his gun drooped slightly. Father installed a biometric lock in the laboratory. My iris can open the first door. I noticed that his left little finger was wrapped in bloody gauze. Unlike the boy in the baseball cap in the photo frame in Victor's study, the young man in front of me had blue knuckles, like a piece of pig iron that had been repeatedly hammered.
Where's Lucas? Leah's flashlight beam swept across the outer wall of the water plant. Several newly driven expansion screws were embedded in the gaps between the moss-covered bricks. Professor Morrison was researching memory transplantation before he disappeared. There's no way Victor would have let him live. Alive. Adrian slapped the magazine into the chamber of the gun. I hacked into the laboratory's ventilation system monitoring. At 3 o'clock yesterday morning, there was a man in a white coat knocking on the wall, on the B3 floor. Morse code, a distress signal, SOS. The morning mist was suddenly torn apart by the wind, and the weather vane on the top of the water plant squeaked and turned half a circle. I touched the pistol at my waist. The metal was chillingly cold. The manhole cover of the number 3 sedimentation tank was rusted, and Leah had to kick it 3 times with the heel of her tactical boots before she could pry it open. The smell of mold and rust rose up, and below was a spiral staircase leading downwards. There were fluorescent marks on the wall every 5 steps, like some kind of deliberately preserved ritual. The guards changed shifts every 20 minutes. I pulled down my sleeves to cover my mouth and nose, my voice muffled in the tunnel. Just now outside the factory, I read about the big guy with the taser. He worked the night shift in the laboratory last Wednesday. The surveillance blind spot is at the corner of the B2 floor, and the ventilation duct can be climbed into the core area. Adrian's phone screen lit up, and the blue light illuminated his tense jawline. The iris lock will automatically reset in 3 minutes. When the security door on the B1 floor clicked open, the burning sensation on the back of my neck suddenly intensified. The surveillance camera on the wall turned half a circle, and the red indicator light went out. Leia cut off the power supply outside. The metal door of the core area glowed with a faint blue light, and had an inverted triangle engraved on it, exactly the same pattern as the one on the carpet in Victor's study. Adrian put his eyes close to the identifier, and the moment I saw his pupils contract, I heard the sound of gears meshing from inside the door. Stand back. I held his shoulders and kicked the crack in the door. On that stormy night, 20 years ago, I kicked open the door,
of my kitchen in the same way, and saw my mother's blood crawling along the cracks in the tiles to the tip of my shoe. The moment the door opened, I was staggered by some invisible force field. The scene in front of me suddenly distorted. The morning mist in the birch forest turned into the warm yellow light of the nursery. I was holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket in my arms. Was it me? No, Victor's son. Welcome to the memory layer. Victor's voice came from all directions. He was standing in front of the French window in a custom-made suit, with the old dock of Grey Harbor behind him. Do you think you can see through me with that little ability? Look at this. Look at what you want to forget the most. The baby suddenly took on the face of my 7-year-old sister, whose hair was still stained with soot from the fire. I wanted to hug her, but my fingers penetrated her body. The fragments of memory were like a tangled videotape. The mother was screaming. The father collapsed in the hallway. Victor was standing on the stairs with a gun in his hand, the handle of the gun engraved with the same family totem as the one on the back of Leah's neck. No, I bit my tongue, the taste of blood stinging my consciousness. Your wife wasn't murdered, she herself. Shut up. Victor's face suddenly twisted, and the skin under his suit began to peel off, revealing the rotten muscles underneath. Helen was killed by those stupid doctors. I just want her to live in my memory. Adrian's fist hit my shoulder and I almost fell down in pain. His pupils reflected another world. We were standing in front of a circular operating table, surrounded by flashing neural interface instruments, and Victor's holographic projection was frantically inputting commands. He's using a memory device to attack our brainwaves.
Adrian pulled off the cross from his neck, which was his mother's relic. Lucas said that cracking it requires synchronized brain frequencies.
There were knocking sounds under the operating table, 3 long and 2 short. I lay down and saw a pale face under the metal partition. Lucas Morrison. He had electronic shackles on his wrists and a data cable plugged into his temple. Press the red button. That's the emergency release. Victor's holographic projection suddenly changed into Leah's appearance, her police badge glowing in the blood. Evan, you can't save anyone, including yourself. I grabbed the wrench on the operating table and smashed it at the projection. Amid the crisp sound of shattering glass, the real Leah emerged from the ventilation duct, with a cut on her tactical vest. All the outer guards have been dealt with. The self-destruct sequence has been activated. 7 minutes left. The alarm suddenly sounded and cement debris began to fall from the ceiling. Lucas' fingers flew across the keyboard, and the electronic shackles emitted sparks. The core area is locked. We have to go to the central server room to enter the password. Before Victor's holographic projection disappeared, his laughter mixed with the alarm pierced the eardrums. Do you think you can stop me? The secret of Grey Harbor Town has long been rooted in the memory bank. Adrian suddenly dragged me to the server room. His grip was as strong as a pair of pliers. The password is my mother's birthday, May 7th. As the server room door closed behind us, I heard Leah yelling something, but black liquid seeped from the cracks in the ceiling. Was that coolant or was it Victor's memory potion? Countdown display, 05 minutes, 57 seconds. Lucas's electronic shackles snapped off, and he rushed to the control console like a drowning man. After entering the password, remember to pull the red lever. The back of my neck has become numb from the pain. The hair in the mirror has turned completely white, and the wrinkles at the corners of my eyes could kill a mosquito. But I don't care about these at the moment. My fingers press on the keyboard, and each letter is like a red-hot iron block. 1973. The server started beeping, and the red lever was at the deepest part of the console. The moment Adrian pounced, a piece of cement from the ceiling hit his back. He groaned but still pulled the rod down. Successfully removed. Lucas's voice was filled with tears. But the self-destruct program can't be stopped. This is the backup system. Leah pushed open the door of the server room. Her left arm was bleeding, and she held a black USB flash drive in her hand. Here is the map of the lab. There is an escape passage underground. Under the central cooling pool. Amid the alarm, I could hear my own heartbeat, like a drum. The metal cover of the cooling pool was badly rusted, and Leah had to hit it 5 times with the butt of her gun before she could pry it open. Below is a narrow pipe that can only accommodate 1 person. You first. I pushed Adrian. Take Lucas with you. Without saying a word, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me inside. The musty smell in the pipes was stronger than before, and the sound of dripping water exploded in my ears. Leah was last, her breath on the back of my neck. 4 more minutes. At the end of the cooling pool was a metal door with a combination lock glowing red. Adrian's hands were shaking. He inserted the USB drive, and a line of words popped up on the screen. Memory Lab self-destruction countdown. 03 minutes 12 seconds. The moment the door opened, I saw a circular space behind it. Rows of glass jars were embedded on the wall, and each jar contained a brain. Victor's memory bank. On the glass platform in the center, there lay a corpse in a white dress. Her face was identical to the photograph in Victor's study, and there was an old scar on her left wrist. From the carpal bone to the elbow. Helen committed suicide, I heard myself say, as if my voice was coming from far away. You lied to everyone, including your son. Victor's voice suddenly came from all directions. This time there was no holographic projection, only a cold electronic sound. Then go to hell with my memory. The ceiling began to shake violently. Glass jars exploded one after another, and the liquid containing the brain splashed onto the wall, like a bloody abstract painting. Adrian dragged Lucas toward the door, Leah's hand still on my belt. Finally, I took a look at the corpse of the woman in the white dress. In her right hand was a piece of paper which was wrinkled by the liquid, but the words on it could still be recognized. Vic, don't use my death as an excuse. There was a muffled sound coming from the cooling pool pipes. That was the sound of the self-destruction program beginning to decompose the structure. As we rushed into the escape passage, we heard the crisp sound of glass breaking, and Victor's screams behind us, mixed with alarms, heartbeats, and the roar of death that was getting closer and closer. Leah's flashlight illuminated the iron stairs at the end of the passage, with ice on the rusty steps. I counted the steps and climbed up, and each step felt like walking on cotton. The burning sensation at the back of my neck had spread to my entire body. My skin felt like it was being roasted by fire, and there was a chill between my bones. When the manhole cover at the top of the ladder came into view, the countdown showed 00 minutes and 57 seconds. Leah climbed up first, and when she reached out to pull me up, I saw the family totem on the back of her neck was bleeding, not a wound, but the blood vessels under the skin twisting like a living thing. Adrian pushed me from behind, and I grabbed Leah's wrist. The moment I took the last step, there was a rumble like thunder from underground. The manhole cover was blown away by the airwave, and we fell in the snow watching an orange-red fireball rising in the direction of the water plant. The heat wave hit my face and melted the frost on my eyelashes. Adrian knelt in the snow, Lucas still gasping in his arms. Leah's police uniform caught fire, and she rolled in a snowdrift as the flames crackled. I touched the back of my neck and found that the skin was so loose that it could be pulled apart in a large piece. Looking up at the sky, the morning mist in Huigang town has dissipated, revealing lead-gray clouds. My phone vibrated in my pocket. This time it was an unknown number. I pressed the answer button, and Victor's voice, mixed with the noise of electricity, was clearer than ever. Evan Hastings, you think you won? He laughed. But your sister's memory is still in my laboratory. The call was disconnected. Leah crawled over to me, her face blackened by smoke, her badge crooked at her collarbone. I wanted to help her straighten herself, but my hands were shaking so badly. The escape route, she coughed, doesn't lead to the ground. I followed her gaze and saw the manhole cover of the escape ladder lying in the snow 20 meters away. and the place we had just climbed out of was an abandoned ventilation hole. From deep within the tunnel came the sound of concrete breaking, as if something was pushing upwards. In the snow, our shadows were stretched out by the firelight and overlapped each other like a twisted corpse. When the snow particles got into my collar, I realized I was shivering. It wasn't because it was cold. January in Grey Harbor was always so cold that ice chips came out of the bones, but because the loose skin on the back of his neck rubbed against his collar like a warm old rag hanging on it. This body is a reminder that every extra minute of life is stolen. He said Ross's memory is still in the lab. I held up my phone to Leah, and the call log on the screen was still glowing blue. She had just patted out the remaining embers on her police uniform. There was a burnt finger mark on her left cheek. The police badge was crooked under her collarbone, swaying slightly with her breathing. Adrian helped Lucas up from the snowdrift. The old scientist's white coat was soaked in blood, and there was a dent on his right shoulder, probably caused by being hit by metal fragments in the explosion. But he was still smiling, poking his temple with his bloody finger. Victor's laboratory has 3 layers of protection. The emergency ventilation vent we just climbed out of is the core area 30 meters underground. He coughed, blood foam splashing on the snow. We have to go back to get the memory storage device. Go back. Leah grabbed my wrist. Her hand was incredibly hot. There was movement in the tunnel just now, didn't you hear it? The sound of concrete breaking. That's a sign that the self-destruct sequence has been activated. Lucas suddenly grabbed my arm, his nails almost digging into my loose skin. Victor triggered the main reactor overload 20 minutes ago. Now the oxygen concentration in the core area is dropping by 3% every minute, and the temperature is rising by 10 degrees every 5 minutes. We have 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Is it enough for a 50-year-old alcoholic to run through a 30-meter underground death tunnel? I touched the pistol on my waist, the Glock that had been with me for 8 years. The handle still had body temperature. Leah, you and Adrian go and hold Victor back. He should be in the control center now. We need a password to cut off the self-destruct program. And the password? I looked at Lucas. In his late wife's necklace. The old scientist forced a wry smile. When I helped him design the system 3 years ago, he said that the most secure password is the most precious memory. Leah's police boots rolled over broken glass in the snow. She took off the tactical flashlight from her waist and threw it to me. The beam drew a white mark on the snow. I want to see you on the ground in 7 minutes. When she turned around, the police badge finally fell off. I bent down to pick it up, but Adrian got there first. He pressed the badge into Leah's hand and rubbed the burn on the back of her hand with his fingertips. I know my father's laboratory better than you do. The iron fence at the entrance of the tunnel has been twisted and deformed, like tinfoil crumpled by a giant hand. As I climbed down with Lucas in my arms, I could hear Leah's footsteps overhead. She and Adrian were heading towards the control center. A damp, musty smell mixed with a burnt smell surged up. The emergency lights flickered overhead, illuminating the water stains on the wall into a dark red color, like blood that had not been wiped clean. Go left, Lucas's voice was vague. There's an inspection hatch behind the third pipe. His weight was all on my shoulders. I could feel the outline of his shoulder blades, which hurt my ribs. The lock on the inspection port was an old combination lock. As soon as my fingertips touched it, the metal surface turned red hot. The temperature was indeed rising. Lucas said suddenly. I looked up at him, and his pupils shrank to pinpoints. That was his late wife's birthday. Caroline Marlowe. September. The moment the lock tongue pops out with a click, the alarm sounds. Red lights flashed wildly in the inspection port, and I saw a metal door in front of me. That should be the entrance to the core area, with electric wires wrapped around the door handle. Sparks were crackling. Lucas suddenly broke free from me and stumbled toward the control console next to the door. He pressed his right hand on the scanning area, and the moment his skin touched the metal, burnt smoke came out. Retina recognition. He panted, I helped him debug it. I'm in the Iris database. The console screen lit up, and a green data stream flashed across the screen, finally freezing on a line of words. Memory storage unit. Hastings Ross. I rushed over and nearly broke the screen with my fingers. 3 years ago in FBI archives, I went through the files on the Huigang Town massacre case, and all the records about my sister were colored black. And at this moment, this metal box that is shining with a cold light contains her last 30 seconds of memory, the scene of her last moments of life that I couldn't touch even with Whisper of the Dead. Take it. Lucas pointed to the drawer under the console. There's a memory extractor in it. Victor wants a living memory transplant, so the storage unit must be kept low temperature. His voice suddenly weakened, and I realized that his white coat was soaked with blood. Dark red liquid was dripping from between his fingers, forming a small puddle on the ground. The alarm suddenly changed its tone and turned into a shrill beep. I looked up, and the countdown above the metal door jumped. Let's go. Lucas pushed me back. The door is about to be sealed. As soon as we rushed into the maintenance hatch, we heard the roar of twisted metal behind us. When I looked back, the door to the core area was tightly closed, as if it had never been opened. I clenched the metal box in my arms, and could feel it against my heart, through my coat. Was that the warmth of my sister, or does this thing itself carry the afterglow of death? The temperature in the tunnel was ridiculously high. My shirt stuck to my back, and my loose skin was wrinkled from sweat. Suddenly there was a gunshot from the front, the crisp sound of a Glock. Leah's tactical flashlight flickered around a corner, and I saw Adrian half kneeling on the ground with his left arm covered in blood, while Victor Marlowe stood opposite him in a neat suit, as if he had just attended a community charity dinner. Evan Hastings. He raised the remote control in his hand, and the red button glowed at his fingertips. Do you think you can take away my wife's research results? On the console behind him, the countdown jumped as Leah lunged from the side and hit Victor on the wrist with her baton. The remote went flying, hit the wall, and bounced into the drain. Adrian took the opportunity to hug Victor's legs, and the philanthropist in a handmade suit screamed and fell down, his gold-rimmed glasses sliding to the tip of his nose. I rushed over and stepped on his hand holding the gun. That silver Colt was exactly the same model as the bullet shell left at the scene of the family murder 20 years ago. Rose's memories. I squatted down and stared into his blue eyes. Where do you keep her memories? In a place you can never reach. He laughed, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth into his bow tie. But it doesn't matter. My Caroline said that memory is contagious. Do you think the memory fragments of those whose memories I tampered with will remain dormant forever? His pupils suddenly dilated. They will wake up like a virus. Shut up. Leah hit him on the back of his neck with her baton. Victor's head tilted to one side and he fainted. Adrian ripped off his tie and tied his hands behind his back to the water pipe. Only then did I notice that there was a piece missing from Adrian's right ear, and the edge was jagged, probably from being cut in the melee just now. Go. Lucas leaned against the wall, his forehead against the hot pipe. 1 minute countdown. As we ran towards the vent, the ground began to shake. Concrete blocks from the ceiling fell down and hit Leah's tactical helmet, making a dull sound. The metal box in my arms suddenly became hot, like a red-hot coal. When I turned the last corner, I saw a figure rushing out from the shadows. It was Sophia Chen, her camera hanging around her neck, the lens cap still on, her face covered in dust, but she was smiling as if she had found front-page news. You need this. She stuffed a USB into my hand. The surveillance of the underground clinic. Victor and your father. No, Leah's father. A secret meeting on May 17. He gave Marlowe a key, the one that was lost at the murder scene. We'll talk about it later. Leah pulled her arm and ran towards the vent. Now, the blast wave came from behind. I was thrown against the wall, and the metal box flew out and rolled twice on the ground. Sophia rushed over to pick it up, her long hair blown up by the wind, revealing a light pink scar on the back of her neck. The shape of the birthmark on the back of my sister's neck was exactly the same as the scene of the murder 20 years ago. "Catch me." Adrian's hand reached out. I grabbed his wrist. Leah grabbed my belt, and Sophia grabbed Leah's police uniform. The manhole cover of the ventilation hole was right above my head, and light from the snow leaked through the gaps, like a life-saving light. The moment we fell into the snow, there was an earth-shaking roar behind us. The underground area where the laboratory was located collapsed, and a bottomless crack appeared on the snow. Black smoke, carrying broken glass, rushed into the sky, and exploded in the lead-gray clouds like a deformed flower. Adrian knelt in the snow, searching for Victor's body with trembling hands, but there was only half a bloody cufflink engraved with CM, the initials of Caroline Marlowe. Leah checked Lucas's wound. The old scientist had fainted. His face as white as snow, only his chest was still rising and falling slightly. I touched the metal box in my arms. It was still there, still warm. Sophia squatted beside me and put the USB into my pocket. When her fingertips touched my loose skin, she paused. "Your hand." "I'm just old." I forced a smile and hugged the metal box tighter. The phone vibrated at this moment. It was the number of the Hugang Town police station. When I picked up the phone, I heard the voice of the police officer on duty, who was obviously panicked. Captain, someone from the convenience store in the north of the city, called the police and said that he remembered killing someone last week, but the surveillance showed that he had never been to the scene. There was also an old man in the south of the city who insisted that he saw his daughter, who died 30 years ago, buying groceries. Leah's fingers were pinched until they turned white. She looked up at me, the police badge still in her palm, warmed by her body temperature. The sound of an ambulance siren was heard in the distance, and the red and blue lights danced on the snow, just like the alarm in the laboratory. Adrian suddenly stood up, his shadow stretched out by the firelight, superimposed on my and Leah's shadows, like a twisted corpse. "My father's lab," he said, his voice so soft it sounded like a sigh, "has a backup server. It's in a warehouse over the Canadian border." The snow started falling again, landing on the metal box and quickly melting into water. I looked at the smoke in the distance and heard my own hoarse voice asking, "What's in there?" Adrian said nothing. He just looked at the sky. In the lead gray clouds, something was awakening, like fragments of memory blown away by the wind, floating back from all corners and falling into the hearts of the living. As I shoved the metal box under the passenger seat, I rapped my knuckles on the rusty side of the car and gasped in pain. My 50-year-old body is really useless. Last week I could bend iron railings with my bare hands, but now I have to use my teeth to help me even twist off a bottle cap. Leah's police car skidded in the snow. I stared at the icicles on the windshield and heard her gnashing her teeth as she said, "The town hospital just received 7 more patients, all with confused memories." A nurse said an old lady insisted she was an elementary school teacher in 1998, and she held the doctor's arm to recite multiplication tables. "It's related to Victor's industry." I rubbed my swollen temples. The car radio suddenly started crackling, and a nursery rhyme, 10 Little Indians, floated out along with the sound of electricity. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. On that stormy night in 1995, I curled up in the closet and heard this song playing on the gramophone in the living room. The police station's heater was humming so loudly that it made my brain hurt. Adrian squatted in the corner holding a laptop. The blue light from the screen made his eye sockets turn blue. Lucas slapped a stack of surveillance screenshots on the table. The corner of the paper brushed the edge of my coffee cup, and brown liquid splashed on the old photo of Grey Harbor Town's outstanding police officer of the year. In the photo, the 23-year-old me was holding the trophy and smiling. But now my face is covered with wrinkles. Look at the coordinates. Lucas pushed his glasses. The projector projected a heat map on the wall. The red spots looked like blood beads. the convenience store in the north of the city, the vegetable market in the south of the city, the old movie theater on 3rd Avenue. All of them were properties of Victor Group before 2010. When he sold these factories, I helped with the asset appraisal. His Adam's apple moved. At the time he said he wanted to transform into a philanthropist. Now it seems he buried memory disruptors in these places. Adrian suddenly spoke up. His fingers flew across the keyboard, calling up a set of waveform graphs. My father always said that memory is the most fragile prison. If he could make the whole town misremember the time, place, and murderer, he slammed the computer shut. He could seal the events of 20 years ago in their memory forever. Leah's police badge cast a small shadow on the table. She loosened her tie, revealing the pale blue veins on her collarbone. Underneath was a tattoo of a black rose, exactly the same as the totem that the serial killer carved on his victims. Divide into 3 groups. She poked the tip of her pen on the heat map. Adrian and Lucas will check the server at the Canadian border. Sophia will continue to dig up information about the underground clinic. Evan and I will go to the old textile factory. That was Victor's earliest industry and the reddest point on the heat map. The iron gate of the old textile factory was hung with an iron chain, as thick as a thumb. When I used a Swiss Army knife to pry the lock, the blade suddenly got stuck. Someone has been here recently. I squatted down and saw half a shoe print on the snow. It was a size 42 shoe with a rubber sole, and the pattern was the same as the shoe print found at the scene of the family murder last week. Leah drew her pistol, the click of the safety catch ringing loudly in the cold air. The moment I opened the door, the smell of mold and rust rushed into my nose. The workshop was filled with spindles half a person's height, and some of the yarns were wrapped with faded blue cloth strips. This was the mark of the female textile workers in Huigang town in the 1980s. My mother also wore this kind of ribbon when she was alive. My temples began to throb and fragments flashed before my eyes. A woman in a blue cloth shirt, standing on tiptoe to reach the spindle. A shadow behind her raised an iron rod. No, was that a side effect of Whisper of the Dead? Or has the memory interference in this place already begun? Evan? Leah's voice suddenly became distant. I blinked, and her face distorted into 2 double images in my vision. On the left she was holding a gun, but on the right she was smiling. That was the smile she had 20 years ago, under the swing set in the elementary school playground, when a little girl with ponytails handed her half a piece of orange candy. What did you see? She grabbed my arm, her fingertips cold as ice. Only then did I realize that I was crying. On November 7th, 1995, my mother went to work the night shift at the textile factory wearing a blue cloth shirt. Before she left, she touched my forehead and said she would buy me new sneakers when she got her salary. Later, when the police found her in the workshop warehouse, she was holding an unfinished pair of woolen socks in her arms, with the stitches crooked because she was struggling in her last moments. Over there, Leah pointed her gun deep into the workshop. There was a huddled figure in the shadows, its grey coat stained with blood. I squatted down and sniffed the body. The body was still warm and there was a pinhole on the back of its neck. The same wound as the previous victims with disordered memories. The burning sensation of Whisper of the Dead rose from my spine. I gritted my teeth and pressed down the dead's eyelids. The price of aging screamed under my skin. The wrinkles on the back of my hands deepened in an instant, and my knees felt like they were filled with lead. Images flooded in, a faded electronic screen showing memory calibration, ZOA 7, a hand in a rubber glove, pushing medicine into an IV tube, and the convenience store owner in the surveillance footage saying I killed someone to the air. In the last 30 seconds, the deceased looked up, and the camera reflected a mark on the wall. It was the logo of Lucas Laboratory, with a cross drawn on it in red paint. It's his device. I stumbled to my feet, knocking over the spindle next to me. The sound of metal collision exploded in the workshop, and Leah's gun hit the ceiling with a bang, scaring away a few sparrows. Lucas's memory tampering device has been modified. and Victor is using it to insert false memories into the brains of living people. The phone vibrated in my pocket. Sophia's message popped up, and the photo showed a yellow document titled Memory Storage and Consciousness Transfer Experiment Record. Victor Marlowe, with a string of garbled characters at the end. It's encrypted using a military-grade algorithm. Her voice was breathless, and there was the sound of shattering glass in the background. I found it in the secret compartment of the underground clinic. They found me. Sophia, Leah called into the phone, but there was only a busy tone. I pulled her out the door. The wind blew snow into my collar, making me shiver with cold. The chimneys of the old textile mills billowed black smoke behind us, like a raised middle finger. The lights in the police station were still on. Adrian and Lucas's car was parked at the door, steam still coming out of the hood. When I took out the metal box, my fingertips touched a thin layer of ice. Just now in the factory, snow and water seeped into the cracks. Maybe the things in the box can unlock the secret of the encrypted file. Maybe all the tampered memories can be restored to their original place. Leah pushed open the door, and warm air mixed with the aroma of coffee poured out. Sophia's coat was draped over the back of a chair, and on the seat was an open laptop, the screen full of garbled zeros and ones. Adrian was on the phone. He looked up when he heard the noise and moved his lips. The Canadian server was destroyed. I placed the metal box in front of the garbled code. The moment the lid of the box was opened, everyone held their breath. Inside lay a silver chip with the same pattern as the garbled code at the end of the file in Sophia's photo. The snow was still falling. The encrypted file cursor was jumping on the screen like a heart that was about to stop. My breath fogged on the cold glass of the police station, and I rapped the back of Sophia's chair with my knuckles. Her laptop was still scrolling madly through binary code, like an old typewriter that had swallowed a fly. This is not an ordinary encryption method. Lucas took off his glasses and rubbed the coffee stains on the lenses with his fingertips. I've seen the CIA's quantum encryption. It's not so paranoid. His fingertips slid across the silver chip in the metal box. These lines are the trigger points of the self-destruct program. Every time a layer is cracked, the chip will burn 1/10 of the data. We have to find the key before it becomes scrap metal. Leah slammed the thermos down on the table, spilling coffee onto Sophia's interview notes, leaving a brown stain. What do you need? She loosened her tie, the police badge flashing on her collar. Server. Decoder. I can access the National Guard's equipment. In 20 minutes. It's useless. Lucas interrupted her, tapping the Greek letters that suddenly popped up in the garbled code with his index finger. This is a recursive algorithm that uses memory as the key. When he looked up, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes looked like they were cut by a knife. Victor tampered with the memories of at least 30 people, and these tampered fragments are embedded in the encryption chain. To unlock it, we have to piece together the fragments first. I touched the back of my neck, and the skin there felt like dried old bark. Yesterday when I used Whisper of the Dead to read the memory of the textile factory guard, I had aged another half a year, but at this moment the chip in the metal box was getting hot, burning my palms. I can try. As the words came out of her mouth, Leah had already raised the coffee cup to her lips and knocked it heavily on the wooden table. Evan, her voice was strained. Those whose memories were tampered with, I interrupted her, are all dead. I pulled out a stack of autopsy reports from the inner pocket of my coat. On top was a photo of the old postman. When his throat was cut, he was still holding a half-delivered letter in his hand. Victor cleaned up all those who knew the truth. But the memories of the dead don't lie. I lifted up my sleeves, and the blood vessels on my arms were like crawling earthworms. Each memory is 30 seconds. I can find the tampered part in the last picture before they died. Lucas suddenly leaned forward, his glasses sliding down to the tip of his nose. Can you read the specific contents of the memory? Mathematical formulas, code structure. I tried to read the memory of a bank robber, I said, pulling the corner of my mouth. It was 3 years ago in Chicago. I used my ability to find the warehouse where the money was hidden. The price was that my hair turned white overnight. Before he died, he was reciting pi. I remembered the first 70 digits. Sophia suddenly squeezed in from the door, her scarf still dripping with snow and the ends of her hair were covered with ice. I found the nurse at the underground clinic. She pushed her phone over, and the screen showed a blurry surveillance video. She died in a car accident last week, but the emergency records said she swallowed. She said time is going backwards. I held the phone tightly as the nurse's face in the video flickered in the emergency light. Her fingers were scratching the edge of the stretcher, and the shape of her lips was a string of numbers. I closed my eyes, and memories rolled through my mind like rotten film. The humid emergency room, the stinging smell of disinfectant that made my nose sore, and the ticking of the ECG monitor that was getting slower and slower. The nurse's pupils gradually dilated. What had she been repeating in the last 30 seconds? It wasn't time goes back. It was 3792X, with the X drowned out by the screaming of the blood oxygen alarm. X stands for the Greek letter C. Lucas suddenly slammed the table, causing the keyboard to slide half a foot away. Terminator of the recursive algorithm. His fingers quickly tapped on the keyboard, and the garbled code suddenly stopped, and a blood-red warning popped up. Remaining data set. Next, I grabbed the second autopsy report for the town library keeper, who had been found slumped over an introduction to neuropsychology with blunt force trauma to the back of her head. I closed my eyes and memories came flooding back. The library filled with the smell of pine, the administrator sorting old newspapers, and the front page reading 20th anniversary of the Grey Harbor Town textile factory fire. She suddenly looked up, her eyes fixed where I couldn't see her, and she muttered, "Fractal structure, fractal structure." Then there was a sharp pain. She stumbled and knocked over the bookshelf. Gödel, Escher, Bach fell at her feet. The spine of the book cracked, revealing the note inside. On it was a string of code with the same spiral pattern as the garbled code on the screen. Fractal encryption. Lucas's voice was trembling. He pulled Sophia's interview notes and drew a spiral on the back of the paper with a pen. Each layer of encryption is a smaller version of the previous layer. The recursive point is here. He pressed the enter key. The screen flashed, and the garbled code began to fade at a speed visible to the naked eye. Evan. Another paragraph. The third memory is of old Joe from the garage. His body dumped in an abandoned canal. His lungs full of rusty water. I gritted my teeth. The headache brought by aging was like a hammer hitting my temple, and my back teeth were almost broken. Before his death, old Joe was wiping a wrench. The light reflected from the wrench revealed a photo. It was the wedding photo of Victor and his late wife, with 1998 date.
No, it's a timestamp.
I opened my eyes suddenly. May 7th. Lucas's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and he suddenly laughed. He entered the date and time. The screen made a beep sound, and all the garbled characters disappeared, revealing a screen full of text and pictures. Leah came closer, her perfume mixed with the smell of my tobacco, condensing in the cold air. "Oh my God," she whispered, her fingertips stroking the memory tampering device version 2.0 design on the screen. He uses memory disorder to create a time loop, making people experience the same day over and over again until they have a mental breakdown, and then her voice choked. Then he used these collapsed people to create chaos and launch the ultimate plan during the chaos. Sophia's cell phone suddenly rang. It was the photos she had taken of the underground clinic. When one of the photos was enlarged, a metal can could be seen in the corner. The label read hallucinogen 9, dosage enough to confuse memory. He wants everyone in this town to live in a prison of his own memory. My throat tightened, and in the chaos, complete the resurrection ceremony for my deceased wife. Adrian suddenly spoke. We all turned to look at him. This young man who always wore a three-piece suit was now slumped in his chair, his tie crooked to his collarbone. I saw my mother's diary when I was a child. She said, "Death is just a prank of time." For so many years, my father has been trying to stuff her memories into a living person. The conference room suddenly became so quiet that you could hear the sound of snow hitting the window. Leah's intercom suddenly exploded. It was the patrolman's voice. "Sheriff, there are more than 20 people fighting in the town center square. They all say that the other party stole their yesterday's wallet." She grabbed her coat, and her police badge hit the corner of the table with a crisp sound. "This is a rehearsal." She looked at me. "We have to." Adrian's phone vibrated at this moment. He took it out very slowly, as if he was touching a mine that could explode at any time. The screen lit up and displayed unknown number. He picked up the phone, said hello, and then froze. I saw his Adam's apple rolling, his knuckles clenched white, his eyes sweeping over each of us, and then quickly dropping. "Okay," he said, his voice so light it sounded like a sigh. "I understand." After hanging up the phone, he placed the phone upside down on the table. I noticed that his ring finger was shaking, which was the mark of a ring. He was wearing his mother's heirloom just last week. Just as Leah was about to speak, he suddenly stood up, and the chair made a harsh sound on the ground. "I go to the bathroom." After he left, Sophia touched my arm and mouthed, "There's something wrong with him." Lucas stared at the words "Ultimate Plan, Start Time, Tomorrow Night at 10 o'clock" on the screen, and his pen twirled rapidly between his fingers. Leah held the walkie-talkie tightly, her fingertips pressing against the switch, as if pressing on her heart. I stared at the phone Adrian left behind. Before the screen went dark, the last thing that appeared was an unread text message. "Your mother's memory is still in my hands." I stared at the bathroom door that Adrian had slammed open. The creaking sound from the metal door hinges was like a rusty needle, pricking the back of my neck. Sophia's fingers were still on my arm, her nails digging into my skin. This girl who always pinned her press card to her collar now had vigilance in her eyes. "He took off his ring last week," Leah said suddenly. She held the intercom to her ear, her thumb still pressing the call button. "I've seen the photo. On the day of his mother's funeral, the silver ring was still on his ring finger." Lucas's pen clattered to the table. He stared at the jumping countdown on the screen. The red number of 10 o'clock tomorrow night was like a ball of fire. Victor's memory storage is located on the 3rd floor underground of the old steel mill. It was an abandoned steel rolling mill he acquired 20 years ago. Adrian participated in the review of the reconstruction drawings. He knows all the secret passages. I bent down to pick up Adrian's phone. The moment the screen lit up, the text message stabbed my eyes again. "Your mother's memory is still in my hands." The font was Victor's favorite copperplate printing. Each letter carried an old-fashioned elegance, like a poisoned silver knife. "I'll go see him." I stood up holding the phone, feeling a familiar dull pain in my knee. Lately, this 50-year-old body has been reminding me that I have stolen too much time with Whisper of the Dead. One of the lights in the bathroom was broken. In the dim light, Adrian was facing the mirror and splashing his face with cold water. Drops of water dripped down his chin into his collar, and the base of his finger where the ring should have been was bluish-white. Hearing the footsteps, he turned around abruptly, with tears in his eyes, like a cat whose tail was stepped on. "Evan." His voice trembled. "My dad. He said that if I don't send him the location tonight, he will burn my mom's last memory." His Adam's apple rolled to ashes. I leaned against the door frame and fished out the crumpled cigarette box from my pocket. "This is my 3rd pack of Camel cigarettes today. Leah always scolds me for seeking death, but at this moment the bitter taste of tobacco keeps my tongue clear." "What is your mother's last memory?" He was stunned. "You told me this when you were drunk last Wednesday." I lit a cigarette, the spark flickering in the darkness. "Your mother was in the intensive care unit 30 seconds before she died. with snow falling outside the window. She touched your face and said, "Don't be like your father," and then she stopped breathing. Adrian's shoulders slumped. He tore off a tissue and wiped his face. His movements heavy, as if he was wiping something off. My father saved her brainwave data as zeros and ones in that memory storage device. He said, "As long as the data is there, my mother is still alive. But if I betray him, he will delete the data." I finished for him. "But you know that's not your mother. The real memory is with you." I tapped my temple. "You remember her body temperature, the smell of the ginger tea she brewed, and the way her eyes turned red when she scolded you for tearing your school uniform. If this data is deleted, your mother is really dead?" He suddenly laughed, and his laugh was uglier than crying. "What do you know? You have seen so many dead people with Whisper of the Dead. Tell me, if you can see your mother's face again when the murderer grabbed her neck, will you kneel down and beg?" I put out the cigarette, and the spark created a small red dot on the tile. The smell of that rainy night 20 years ago suddenly flooded into my nostrils. The smell of rusty blood, burnt wood, and the warmth of my mother's last spit on the back of my hand. I was 8 years old at the time, hiding in the closet, and saw her feet through the crack. Her white cotton socks were covered in mud, and her toes were moving as if they were gently tapping the beat. I heard myself say, "but I'd rather send her killer to hell." Adrian's pupils shrank. "Your mom said, 'Don't learn from your dad.'" I took 2 steps closer, my voice hoarse from the back pain from aging. "What you're learning now is to hide in the bathroom, and let your dad use your mom as a hostage to continue stuffing kids into more families' closets." His phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out and saw a new text message on the screen. "If you don't reply within 5 minutes, the memory bank will start the self-destruct program." The sender was still an unknown number, and the suffix was the IP address of the old steel plant. Fuck the self-destruct program.
I slammed the phone on the sink. Lucas can hack into the storage vault. He cracked Victor's encryption algorithm last week. Go back now and tell us the entrance to the secret passage. When we dismantle the device tomorrow, I will help you make 10 copies of your mother's data. Store it in a USB drive in the cloud in your socks.
"That's enough," he interrupted, staring down at his reflection in the mirror. The water was still rushing, washing away the water on his face, but it couldn't wash away the redness under his eyes. "I need 10 minutes. 2 minutes." I turned to leave, then stopped. "Your mother said at the end, 'Don't be like your father.' But she didn't say, 'Don't do the right thing.'" When she returned to the meeting room, Leah had already spread out the tactical map on the table. A red mark circles the main power supply box of the old steel plant, and a blue arrow points to the entrance to the 3rd underground floor. Lucas was adjusting the antenna of his laptop computer. A green rain of code was dancing on the screen. Victor's plan consists of 2 steps. First, he will use a memory tampering device to make the townspeople suffer from violent hallucinations. Then, he will take advantage of the chaos to activate the bomb buried in the municipal pipeline. He wants to turn Grey Harbor into a burial object for his deceased wife. Funerary objects? Sophia's finger paused on the camera shutter. Isn't he a philanthropist? He donated a library last month. Every book he donated has a photo of his late wife inside it. Leah's fingertips traced over the library mark on the map. I asked someone to check, and on page 27 of every copy of Jane Eyre, there is a snapshot of his wife when she was 25 years old. So he needs chaos. I sat back in my chair, my joints making crackling sounds. When the whole town is tearing each other apart, no one will notice the bomb in the municipal pipe, and his deceased wife will live forever in the flames of the explosion. Lucas pushed up his glasses. The memory device requires continuous power supply. The main power supply is in the distribution room on the B2 floor of the old steel plant. If we can cut off the power supply, the device will shut down within 90 seconds. But his eyes swept across the door. Adrian was standing there, with water dripping from the hem of his shirt. The entrance to the secret passage is in the ventilation shaft of the old silo of the steel plant. Adrian walked to the table and rapped his knuckles heavily on the map. To get down, you have to climb a 30-meter vertical iron ladder. The exit is at the end of the corridor on the 3rd floor underground. When he looked up, the hesitation in his eyes was like fog blown away by the wind. "I'll go with you." Leah patted his shoulder and said, "We'll leave in half an hour. Sophia and Lucas will stay at the police station and monitor all communication bands." "Wait." I held her wrist. "Adrian, I'm with Leah. Lucas, give me a signal generator that can interfere with the memory device. The one you tried last time in the clinic. You'll have to pay a price." Lucas frowned. "That thing will mess up the synapses in your brain. Your body now. I won't survive this month." I curled my lips. Why not exchange it for something useful? The rain started as we approached the old steel mill. The rusty-colored rain flowed down the helmet into the collar. I stepped on the broken glass on the ground and heard Leah's tactical flashlight in front of me shining a bright white light on the wall. Adrian was walking in the middle, and his hiking boots kicked a piece of scrap metal, making a clanging sound which scared away a few crows hiding from the rain. "We're here." He stopped in front of a silo piled with rusty steel ingots and pointed up at the ventilation shaft above his head. The handrail of the iron ladder was covered with green rust, like a chain covered with snakes. Leah climbed up first. The sound of her tactical boots gripping the ladder was steady, like the beat of a drum against my heart. Adrian followed behind, his breathing coming through the intercom. A little hurried but still steady. I was the last one, and I had to stop for 2 seconds after every step I took. My old knees were protesting, but what hurt even more was my heart, which felt like it was being squeezed with every beat. The air on the 3rd underground floor has a sweet and fishy smell. I took off my hard hat and swept the flashlight across the corridor walls. They were covered with photos, all of which were the face of Victor's wife, from her wedding to her sickbed, from the age of 20 to 50. The date was written in red pen on the edge of each photo. The photo of the day she died was the largest, taking up the entire wall, with water droplets condensing on the glass frame, as if it was crying. "The device is at the end." Adrian's voice was muffled. "The door code is my mother's birthday." The moment the door opened, I squinted because of the strong light. In the center of the room stood a metal device about 1 meter tall. Blue light flowed in the glass cover like a bowl of solidified lightning. There were 7 or 8 townspeople lying around, their eyes open but unfocused, and muffled sobs coming from their mouths. It was the memory tampering device playing violent images, turning their brains into a battlefield. "Cut off the power." Leah's voice exploded from the intercom. She had already rushed to the distribution box in the corner, sparks crackling as the tactical knife cut through the wires. Adrian rushed to the control panel, his fingers flying on the keyboard. "I need 3 minutes to crack the self-destruct program." The accident happened the moment I took out the signal generator. The device suddenly beeped, and the blue light turned into a blinding scarlet. The townspeople who were lying down stood up at the same time, their necks twisted at strange angles, and their pupils shrunk to the size of pinpoints. In the front was old Tom, the Grey Haven mailman who had delivered my FBI file last month. At this moment he grinned, revealing the tip of his tongue that he had bitten off, and dug his nails into the wall, making a scream like nails scratching a blackboard. "Stand back." I raised the signal generator and pressed the switch. Electricity ran up my spine, and my temples felt like they were being hit repeatedly with a hammer. The townspeople paused, but soon rushed over again. Old Tom's nails scratched my arm, and blood oozed out, which was abnormally warm. Leah hit him on the back of the neck with her baton, and old Tom fell down without a sound. But more people came up. Their movements were as coordinated as puppets, and they repeated the same words. "Burn it." "It's Victor!" Adrian shouted in front of the console. "He has taken over the device. Now every time a wire is cut, It will trigger the violent memories of 10 people. I wiped the blood off my face and saw the camera on top of the device flash red. Those were Victor's eyes. He was looking at us from somewhere, at these townspeople whose memories he had tampered with, as if he were admiring his most perfect work of art. A master key is needed to shut down the device. Lucas's voice suddenly exploded from the intercom. Victor has planted a backdoor in the system. Now his retinal scan must be entered. Before he finished speaking, the device let out a sharp whistle. All the townspeople stopped at the same time, their hands slowly raised to their throats, their nails digging deep into their skin. Blood oozed from old Tom's neck. His mouth opened wide, but a woman's voice came out. It was the voice of Victor's wife, with a dying gasp. "Adrian, Mom is cold." Adrian's hands were shaking on the console. He turned to look at me, the light in his eyes dying, like a candle blown out by the wind. At this moment, the blue light of the device suddenly surged. I was knocked to the ground by the airwave. The back of my head hit the metal steps, and my vision went black. In a trance, I saw Victor walking out of the shadows. He was wearing a well-tailored suit and holding a silver pistol in his hand, with the muzzle pointing at Adrian's heart. "My child." His voice was gentle, as if he was soothing you to sleep. "Now help your father complete one last thing." The treasure house is about to close, but the next puzzle is waiting. If it moves you, please gently like, subscribe, and pass on this piece. Sleep well, dear wanderer.